2 weeks in space. Today, another attempt to launch Gemini 6 into orbit for a rendezvous in space. Now from the CBS News Space Center in New York, Walter Cronkite.
Good morning, everyone, and here we go again for another attempt to launch Gemini 6 with Navy Captain Walter Schirra and Air Force Major Tom Stafford into orbit to meet rendezvous with, it is hoped, Gemini 7, now in its 11th day, nearing its 12th day on its 116th revolution of the Earth. Gemini 7 just passed over the Cape about a half hour ago for the last time before the trip when it expects to again see ignition and the blast off. Down after Cape Kennedy, the astronauts, Schirra and Stafford, got into their spacecraft almost an hour and a half ago. They were buttoned up a half hour ago, and now the erector is being lowered for a launch at 8:37 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, an hour and 5 minutes from now. The count actually is T-minus 40 minutes and counting, but there is that 25-minute planned built-in hold at T-minus 3 minutes. In other words, the count goes down to 3 minutes before launch. That's 8:34, and then there will be a 25-minute hold. That's a pad built in case anything does go wrong down at the pad or with the spacecraft or the booster, so that perhaps they can get things straightened away before that critical moment when they must blast off if they are to make rendezvous. They can blast off later than the precise second at 8:37, but for every few seconds beyond that time, it delays their rendezvous for an orbit, and some 300 seconds of delay could mean an rendezvous only tomorrow instead of this afternoon at around 2:30 as planned. Let's go down to Cape Kennedy now and check in with our space expert on the scene, Chuck Von Frem. Chuck, how are things going?
Walter, as of now, things could not be going better. Gemini 6 has become known as a hard luck mission. Wally Schirra and Tom Stafford have been trying to get off that pad out there we're looking at right now since last October, and during the night there was some fear the weather might turn up sloppy enough to cause still another postponement today. But when that dawn broke over the Cape, every observer's spirits just soared right out here at Press Site 2. It was one of those picture book sunrises this portion of the Florida coast justly brags about. It was just beautiful. There I go, using one of Wally Schirra's favorite words, just beautiful. And I bet Schirra said just that this morning when he saw the sunrise over the Cape. So weather is no longer a factor, at least at this moment. Everything appears go. As you mentioned, the erector came slowly down 9 minutes ahead of schedule. We're told on the CBS News Service wire that Wally Schirra reported to the blockhouse that he felt a quiver as the erector began coming down, but then he commented that he saw a whole bunch of blue up there, meaning the sky, and of course that made him happy. So the flight crew is now on its own out there with only the umbilical tower offering support and a couple of emergency wires they can ride to the ground in Hollywood style back to the Pad 19 complex should some catastrophic development occur. And of course they can always eject by parachute to safety, but this would so drastically alter the condition of the spacecraft that there'd be no chance for a Gemini 6 launch during the lifetime of Gemini 7 for a rendezvous effort. But right now, optimism is running very high here at the Cape, everything going very smoothly, and it seems now to be just a matter of watching and waiting. Walter?
Well, the possibilities for the launch of Gemini 6 in time for rendezvous, as of this morning, are still two windows this morning, the one opening at 8:37 a.m., a window meaning that little section of time during which a launch would still bring the Gemini 6 orbit into roughly the same path as the Gemini 7 orbit and permit that chase through the skies toward a meeting in space. There's a second window a little later on in the morning, although a little bit shorter than the first. There is one window then tomorrow morning, which would still get Gemini 6 up in time to meet Gemini 7 before its scheduled return to Earth on Saturday morning. And there is the possibility existing of extending Gemini 7's lifetime by 1 day to return on Sunday morning, so that they might still conceivably launch Gemini 6 in 2 windows that open on Saturday morning. This is the contingency planning in case this launch does not get off at 8:37 a.m. this morning as planned, just some 1 hour and 2 minutes from now. The count T-minus 36 minutes and 40 seconds counting, with a 25-minute built-in hold. One development in the last 24 hours, although actually the development has been going on for a week now in a slow fashion. After Gemini 7 circularized the orbit, that is, put the Gemini 7 spacecraft into a perfect circle around the Earth at 186 miles high, the orbit has been deteriorating somewhat, and now it is elliptical. It's 183 miles at its lowest point and 188 miles at its highest point. This is a 5-mile discrepancy and a 2 to 3 mile discrepancy over a perfect circular orbit. But they say at Houston that this is no problem, that this much discrepancy is acceptable, and that they still expect Schirra and Stafford to be able to meet Borman and Lovell, though the maneuvers may be slightly more difficult with an elliptical orbit even of this small discrepancy than a perfectly circular one. At the Cape, Schirra and Stafford seemed to be in great spirits as they went out there to board their spacecraft this morning. The clearing weather must have lifted their spirits, as Chuck Van Fremd suggested a moment ago, since throughout the night there had been an overnight concern about ground fog this morning, and in the picture you can still see just a little of it there at the Cape, but it's not enough to give anybody any trouble now. It could have been serious if that ground fog had been clinging in there at launch time, or as they approach launch time. They've got to have visibility at least around the pad, if not in the skies above, although the stipulations are that they do not have more than about 4/10 cloud cover overhead, so that they've got good observation of the launch. All of that has been subject to real-time planning, as they say these days, meaning that it's extemporaneous somewhat. They don't go by the book like they used to in the early days of the Mercury program. A lot of confidence has come to the men at mission control and in the spacecraft itself. And when at the time of Mercury, where if anything went wrong, they wanted to be sure they had some very clear pictures of what went wrong over the pad. Today, they're a little more confident of their equipment, and they don't stick to the rule book quite as much. After their steak and eggs breakfast that the astronauts had this morning, as usual, Schirra and Stafford made the trip to pad 16 to suit up, and then the familiar ride by van to pad 19. Where you see them here, debarking from that special truck of theirs, carrying their air conditioning equipment, with some handshakes from the boys at the pad. One of them said, last time, a reference, of course, to the fact that these men have twice before boarded this Gemini 6 spacecraft, once on October 25th, when the count was stopped at T-minus 42 minutes when the Agena target vehicle they were going to chase, the unmanned vehicle, that time blew up before it got into orbit. And again last Sunday, when they themselves faced a terribly critical moment after the engine ignited and then was shut down. Wally Schirra there in the foreground tosses a package to one of the suit crew up in the White Room. We haven't heard what that little donation was. Tom Stafford, 35-year-old, behind him there. These two Annapolis graduates about to go up and join another Annapolis man up there in Gemini 7. That's Jim Lovell. Frank Borman is a West Point man. They said they're going to go up there, these three Annapolis fellows, and hold a beat Army rally, outnumbering Frank Borman. The weather, of course, at the Cape is the first critical consideration, but the weather all around the world in the possible recovery zones is important as well. Mike Wallace can tell us how the weather is in other spots. Mike?
Walter, first of all, down at the Cape, the specifics, as we heard from Chuck Von Fremd, things are in first-rate shape. It's partly cloudy with light winds, the temperature in the 60s, and the forecast for launch with light variable winds, seas only 2 feet high down there, visibility 5 miles now, and ground fog and haze with a high, thin, broken deck of clouds, the possibility of some clouds at 500 feet. At the Wasp, in the primary recovery area, in case of launch abort here, the visibility right now is 10 miles, the wind at 6 knots, and the waves at only 2 feet. Then, south of the Cape Verde Islands here, on the possibility of first time around, if anything went wrong and the boys had to be recovered, the weather is good. Then around on the other side, in the other secondary recovery areas, 700 miles southeast of Tokyo, weather is good. 800 miles northeast of Honolulu, weather is good. Let's take a look now on our standard Colesman map at the way these two spacecraft will be playing hide and seek with each other of a sort, at least for the first 4 orbits. Here comes the GT-7 on its projected route across the United States just before the takeoff of GT-6. It will be 1,200 miles ahead, as you can see, when the GT-6 gets up. And for most of the first orbit, Sharon Stafford will be about 1,200 miles behind. Then as they come into the second orbit, they fire their thrusters, and by the time that they are in the middle of that second revolution, they'll be something between 500 and 600 miles behind. They continue this way to the end of the second revolution. By the time that they get to the middle of their third revolution, for their rendezvous, they'll be only about 160 miles behind, and now they are pulling even, as you can see. And it will be in the middle of the 4th orbit, in the middle of the 4th revolution, over the Mariana Islands, actually over the island of Guam, that the rendezvous will take place, and then for 6 hours, GT-6 and GT-7 will be taking a look at one another, hopefully almost eyeball to eyeball. GT-6, GT-7, third time, and this is it for sure, Walter.
Right, Mike. I think everybody has their fingers crossed this morning for what so far has been something of a hard luck mission. In fact, quite a lot of a hard luck mission. To fill you in case any of you missed the details over the last few days, on Sunday morning, it got down to the actual ignition of the Gemini 6 rocket booster, the Titan II. The fire blossomed from the base of that rocket for 1 6/10 seconds and then suddenly shut down. This was a dangerous situation. It was an automatic shutdown triggered by the safety devices aboard the engine just for that purpose, so it wouldn't get off the pad and get into a critical state. But when those engines shut down, there is danger because the fuel and the oxidizer that are hypergolic, meaning that they fire upon contact, come down through 2 great pipes, and once the fire starts, they're sucked through the combustion chamber at a great rate, and that flow of fuel being gulped by that thrust chamber is tremendous. And whether those valves hold or not is the critical matter. When those valves are ordered shut by the safety devices and try to stop that flow, there's always a danger that the valves will burst. If that had happened, it might have been catastrophic. It did not happen. Schirra and Stafford were the cool test pilots that everyone knew them to be. They did not eject from their spacecraft as they might have by parachute. Instead, they stayed with it and preserved the integrity of the spacecraft for this attempt to launch today. Then, meanwhile, they found that the reason that the engine shut down was that a tiny plug, just an electrical plug, almost as simple as those in your home, had pulled loose at the base of the spacecraft. But when they started to establish the spacecraft for the launch this morning, they found that a little tiny plug, I've got one right here, nothing more than that, a little plastic dust cover on one part of the engine had been left on when it should not have been, and the spacecraft couldn't have gone even if that other plug had not fallen out. So there were two critical mistakes in that spacecraft that would have kept it from going at any rate in the booster itself, of course, not in the spacecraft. As a matter of fact, this plug has been in there ever since that engine left the Martin Company plant in Baltimore, and the Gemini 6 could not have gone up on October 25th, even if the Agena target vehicle had not blown up either. So that was a critical matter. It was probably a good thing that the electrical plug fell out before this malfunction caused the engine to shut down even later in the sequence, maybe even after the bolts had been blown and the rocket stood there alone on the pad. Well, at any rate, this morning, with everybody's fingers crossed, it's now about just about 46 minutes to launch time. 8:37 a.m. is that scheduled time. The actual count is T-minus 26 minutes with a 25-minute hold expected at T-minus 3 minutes. CBS News coverage of Gemini 6 and 7 will continue in a moment.
This is the spell of Chanel. Is it any wonder every woman alive wants Chanel No. 5? So give her Chanel No. 5 in the classic bottle and in the rich black and gold perfume for the purse. Surround her with the delight of Chanel Eau de Cologne in bottle or spray. Tempt her with Chanel and let yourself be caught by the spell.
This is Walter Cronkite back at our CBS News Space Center for the launch this morning, it is hoped, of Gemini 6. Finally, at 8:37 a.m. for the first attempt, the rendezvous with another manned spacecraft. The Gemini 7 now in its 116th revolution and due back over the Cape just as Gemini 6 is launched. As we've said, this is the third time around for Schirra, Stafford, and Gemini 6. On a perfect October day, Monday the 25th, Schirra and Stafford made their first trip to Pad 19. They were set then for what was to be the first rendezvous attempt. The only worry on that launch day was whether the complex dual countdown with the Atlas Agena could be carried off. Suited for the trip, carrying their portable air conditioning units, they made what's become, I suppose, a commonplace walk, but still a thrill for most of us, up that gantry ramp into the elevator ride to the White Room. 2,000 feet away, the count on the Atlas Agena had moved forward flawlessly, and at T-minus 95, that rocket lifted off Pad 14 right on the mark, right on schedule. By now, Schirra and Stafford were in the side Gemini 6. They were getting set for the chase and the rendezvous. They didn't know then that the Agena would fail to reach orbit, and they didn't know either that even if it had, they would have remained on Pad 19 as surely as if their Titan rocket were bolted to that pad. But the Agena did not reach its orbit, blowing up mysteriously some 5 minutes after launch. So a disappointed Schirra and Stafford came down from the White Room, still unaware that their Titan booster was crippled by that 2-cent dust cover that I showed you a moment ago. Jammed securely into a line in the engine system would have prevented the rocket from going. That's Stafford. Schirra with the helmet still on, Stafford behind him. Plans moved ahead for Gemini 7-6, starting almost as soon as the GT6 crew was back on the ground. Last Sunday, Schirra and Stafford got their second chance at rendezvous, and this is how far they went.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition. Shut down, Gemini 6. Flight podcast started. Verify program reset. Oxidize the fuel pressure is low. Cloud falling. Roger, Gemini 6, monitor tank pressures. The oxidizer pressure is down to about 32. Roger. Roger, Wally, I'm watching it. Okay, keep an eye on it. Okay, we switched over to time. South of ours down to...
Those were the voices of the astronauts, most particularly Schirra, the command pilot, and the blockhouse at launch. Everyone commented on Sunday, and they have commented many times since, at the calmness of Wally Schirra and Tom Stafford in the face of potential disaster. They stayed with their spacecraft. They counted off all of the instruments, just like good test pilots, back to the blockhouse so that there would be a complete record of what was going on in those critical seconds after the engines were shut down and they did not eject from the spacecraft. Been a lot of talk about that down at the Cape and at the Manned Spacecraft Center in Houston as to whether they perhaps should have ejected or not, and all of the experts say no, they should have used their own judgment and they felt it right. If they had felt motion in the spacecraft and had known that the booster had lifted it off of the pad even by a few inches, then ejection. But they knew that that had not happened. They read their instruments correctly. In a split second, they analyzed the situation. They stayed with the spacecraft. Now, here's Paul Haney at Mission Control at Houston.
257 hours, 21 minutes into the flight of 7. We still look good here on the 7 mission. Carnarvon has just established contact with 7, and we should have about a 7 to 8 minute pass there. Meanwhile, over on 6, around the range, one item is down this morning at Eglin. They have a radar which is inoperative. It is not a mandatory item for launch. It is a highly desirable item. It's an FPS 16 radar that can skin track anything that passes its way. It is a even more highly desirable item for the re-entry phase. We feel right sure that it'll be fixed by the time either one of these spacecraft gets ready for re-entry. Our 7 orbit this morning is 160 by 163, a very acceptable orbit. The limits on our 7 orbit range from a perigee as little as 102 to an apogee of 215. That is, we would go ahead and launch 6 if 7 were in any orbit within those limits. It gets progressively more difficult to catch the vehicle as the orbit gets more elliptical. However, this one is considered quite circular and quite acceptable. The inclination of the 7 orbit to the equator is 28.9 degrees. And now for a more definitive report on 6, let's switch to the Cape.
This is Gemini Launch Control at the Cape. We're now at T-minus 19 minutes, 16 seconds, and counting. Our countdown still continues to proceed excellently. We have just completed our test of the spacecraft propulsion system, and it was reported as a good test. During this test, as we announced earlier, the 25-pound thrusters around the base of the Gemini 6 spacecraft are fired in 1.5-second bursts. We went around the spacecraft in a clockwise fashion, and all of our thrusters responded. We had a good test, and we are now proceeding with the count. Once again, we still have that 25-minute hold, which will come in at the T-minus 3-minute mark if it is not used prior to that time. We received a weather report from the command pilot in the spacecraft, Wally Schirra, for the benefit of the people in the blockhouse and the benefit of the people here in Mission Control. Passed the word that as he looked up through his spacecraft window, he saw some cirrus clouds, about 10th cirrus, he reports, and also a good patch of blue up there. The weatherman here in Mission Control confirms that the weather should be acceptable for a liftoff. We are still in good condition, coming up on 18 minutes and 6 seconds and counting, but still with that 25-minute hold coming up later in the count. This is Gemini Launch Control.
The report from Houston, from Paul Haney, that radar at Eglin Field is out for the moment. A desirable piece of equipment, but not necessary for the launch. In other words, it won't delay the launch, but obviously a great deal more desirable, as he mentioned, for the recovery. He said it ought to be fixed in time for recovery. Well, recovery of Gemini 6, if the rendezvous is achieved today and the pilots Schirra and Stafford have completed their mission successfully should come about 24 to 25 hours after launch, around, in other words, 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. That splashdown area some 400 miles east of Cape Kennedy, where the aircraft carrier Wasp and recovery force is standing by. If they do not achieve rendezvous in this first day, they would not come down then until Saturday morning, the same, or rather Friday morning, Saturday morning, the same time when Gemini 7 will be coming down. In that case, the plan is for them to come down just one orbit, or about 90 minutes apart, which would be a new space first for us too. That would be just one revolution apart for the Wasp to recover both of these spacecraft and their crews. The recovery force feels that they're perfectly competent to do that. Mission control and the astronauts feel that they're capable of bringing their spacecraft down in a close enough area to make that possible. However, that will come only if Gemini 6 does not fully achieve its objective of rendezvous today. A little while ago, I was talking about the fact that there had been discussion since Sunday as to whether Schirra and Tom Stafford should have ejected from their spacecraft on Sunday or not. Had they ejected, there would have been no chance for today's second launch attempt. At a news conference in Houston, reporters asked about the abort.
No one, as far as you know, did come close to ordering ejection.
I'm fairly certain nobody came close to ordering ejection, but I'm sure that Wally Schirra was very close to commanding ejection himself. And I'm sure he was right on the verge, and obviously he did the right thing. It was obviously a very shrewd analysis of the events as they occurred, and he took the proper action.
I think we should point out that under these circumstances, it is not necessary to wait for a command to eject. The circumstances that he faced there were actually grounds for ejection.
Do I understand correctly that it is the commander's prerogative in a situation that could go either way? He does have the choice there.
That's correct.
Well, what he's looking for is first motion. And once you get first motion and then you lose thrust, there's no question about what you're going to do. In this particular case, he did not get an indication of a proper buildup in thrust. He got a first motion indication by the start of his clock, but not the physical cue of first motion. And he also knew that that liftoff occurred at the time of ignition, which is not correct also. There's a 3-second lag, as you were informed yesterday.
Yes.
So he put all of those things together, I'm sure, and arrived at the right decision.
We're terribly conscious that it was 1.6 seconds after the ignition began that the shutdown came, and that was another 1.6 or 1 6/10 seconds before the liftoff should have come. Now this morning, for the first time, we're getting from the Cape and from Houston precise split-second figures as to when various events should take place. For instance, the ignition should take place at 8 o'clock, 8:37, 23.4, or 23 4/10 seconds after 37 minutes after 8 o'clock. And the liftoff should come at 8:37, 26.4. For the first time, we're down to tenths of a second and quite aware of how important they are in the space program. The painstaking preparations for the Gemini launch included, of course, the preparations for the possibility of disaster. Now, what if the astronauts had to make a quick escape from their capsule? Well, a report now on the precautionary tests that were made by CBS News reporter Terry Drinkwater in China Lake, California.
If the giant Titan II missile should explode on the launch pad, the 2 Gemini astronauts would have to escape, and fast, in less than 2 seconds. In this test tower here on the California desert, the escape mechanism is about to undergo its crucial final test. The Gemini capsule is in place, and the countdown is now underway. These models are as near lifelike as possible. They're made out of rubber with tiny, delicate instruments inside to measure the stresses as ejection takes place. It's all an emergency system, which everyone hopes will not have to be used.
4, 3, 2, 1, mark.
Rockets then shoot the astronauts' capsule at nearly 100 miles an hour, propelling them away from the fireball which would surround the missile. Automatic parachutes then open and the astronauts fall back toward Earth. From ejection to parachute landing takes only 11 seconds. We asked the Escape System Project Manager, Bud Heimstadt, if this final test checked out.
After the parachute opened, and if the dummy out here today had been a real astronaut, what shape would he be in right now?
He'd be up walking around talking to us right now. It was a very, very successful test. We're very happy with it.
So this ejection seat is safe for Gemini astronauts. 3 Titan missiles have blown up on the launch pad in the past, but those were Titan 1s in the early stages of testing. And now NASA feels sure the Titan 2s are reliable, and there will be no explosion and the ejection seats won't have to be used. But if there is an accident at Cape Kennedy, and there is an abort on the launch pad in the final seconds before launch, this ejection seat is safe for astronauts. Terry Drinkwater, CBS News, China Lake, California.
However, the ejection seat from the Gemini spacecraft has never been tested by a live astronaut or test astronaut, and there is some concern over the tremendous buildup of G-forces, sudden buildup of G-forces in that, as you see, rocket-powered ejection from the spacecraft. There is some concern that there might possibly be a danger in that launch, and as I remember, Bill Stout, McDonald, I think somewhere I read that it would be in the nature of 15 Gs. That's almost twice the G-force of the launch itself. Is that the figure, or have I got that one wrong? Bill?
Let's try that one on Bob Sharp. Walter, what is the wallop? How do you measure it in pilot terms, Bob, when you fire these seats?
The wallop in this seat is normally about 22 Gs. It comes in 2 short bursts, first by a cartridge which blows you out, which is similar to a standard ejection seat, and then about the time you reach the end of the catapult tube or the end of the seat rails, a sustainer rocket ignites. And this burns for a fraction of a second. The whole G-force is applied for approximately a quarter of a second to the man, and this is a real kick. However, we have some other design factors which kind of reduce the effect of it. Normally, the pilot and command pilot, of course, are laying on their back there, so they have gravity forcing their back tightly into the seat. We also have a very special restraining system which holds them in there tightly, so their spine is straight and the seats are contoured and molded especially for each individual. And this type of design is what enables the crew to sustain a high G loading like this without sustaining injury.
Everything that's built into the system is designed to absorb this kind of shock for them.
Yes, that's right. In addition, there are some of the ejection provisions here that we could run through or show the D-ring, which is located between their legs here on the seat, which requires approximately a 50 to 60 pound pull to initiate the ejection.
Either man can pull a D-ring, and they both go.
Either man can pull the D-ring, and it will eject both seats. However, the command pilot is the one that will make the decision on that. When you first pull the D-ring, the charge then is vented to the hatch actuators, as we saw in the previous film there, which blows the hatches open simultaneously. When the hatches get fully open and locked, then the charge is vented back to the seat so that the seat will not fire through the hatch. It will then fire only when the hatch is open, and both astronauts will be ejected. And of course, we're sitting sideways like this is one of the things that sitting upright like we are makes the seat a little more uncomfortable. And this makes the two trajectories spread apart when they're fired, so there's no danger of the seats colliding in midair.
It sounds pretty much like the standard aircraft ejection seat. Is it different in any way, aside from just the power of the jolt that kicks you out of the cockpit?
It's similar, but it's much more refined. The seat is designed for both a low and a high altitude and high-speed capability. Like on the pad here, when we first fire it, the hatch is open, the rocket, or the charge on the seat fires, then the rocket fires at the time you reach the end of the rails. And as soon as this rocket burns out, and we have what we call a seat man separator. It's a big strap that takes the man, his parachute, his emergency oxygen kit, and separates him from the seat, just physically throws him out from the seat. And then there's an automatic timing device which 3.5 seconds after he initiates ejection will deploy the drogue chute. In other words, it's essentially a cannon that fires a small bullet. This bullet or slug pulls the drogue chute out, and in doing that pulls the main parachute out for deployment. And this is how we obtain the fast deployment sequence which is required on the pad. The
quick opening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the elbow ring here is thrown in here to prevent hitting the elbow on ejection, to restrain the individual more fully.
So they're really locked in, Walter. It is the quickest way out, but it's not guaranteed to be very comfortable.
Bill, maybe Bob could show us the position they assume when they're going to pull that D-ring. They kind of huddle into that seat a little, don't they?
Yes, they are back and stiff in the seat. Of course, their feet are locked in the stirrups. I can show you the provisions on the bottom of the suit here that provide for that. Notice there's a special plastic cap on the heel of the shoe, or the heel of the boot, and the rod on the front of the D-ring hooks behind this, so their feet will not fly out of the seat during this ejection. Due to these high G's and the careful trajectory that must be controlled on the ejection, we need to control the slump and the center of gravity and the position of the body in each one of the seats very closely. So each contour, as I said before, is molded to the individual. He's weighed in a special device, molded. They take x-rays of the spine to make sure it's straight and in proper position in doing this.
All right, thank you, Bob. And when you mention the explosive charge that blows the seat and the pilots out of the spacecraft, and then the bullet-like device which fires to extend the drogue chute as quickly as possible, I might point out that these are in the nature of the pyrotechnics which occasionally you hear mentioned in the space program. The space vehicles are filled with such various explosive devices, the purpose being to assure quick action rather than some electronic device, quick action in all of these critical functions. And incidentally, we might mention that this ejection seat system is peculiar only to the Gemini space program. This is a Titan II rocket in the first and the second stages, and here, right on top, is the space capsule. They don't like it called a capsule any longer because they claim a capsule doesn't have any function of control. This is a true spacecraft, so it's a spacecraft. Here are the two little windows up here, and that's where the two astronauts would be ejected out of these hatches, right there at the top. Now, you'll notice, and probably have noticed in the past, that the configuration, the looks of this thing is considerably different than the Mercury capsules and the top of the Mercury rocket. That looked like this. You see, here is the Mercury capsule with this tower, this large red tower here on top. That was an ejection tower, actually. That fired and pulled the entire capsule off of the rocket and blew it out, and then the parachute brought down the entire thing. There was a reason for that in the Mercury program, and for this system in Titan, and going back to that in Apollo, we'll tell you more about it after we hear.
This is Gemini Launch Control. We're at T-minus 3 minutes in holding. The hold was called just as we came up in the air. T-minus 3 minutes in holding. This hold is expected to last for 25 minutes, leading up to an ignition time of the Gemini launch vehicle at 8:37 and 23 seconds a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Some 3.4 seconds after ignition, we will have liftoff. We just completed a whole series of final status checks in the countdown in which all elements report in on their status, both in the blockhouse and in the mission control centers, both here at the Cape and the mission control center in Houston. All elements reported go. When the command pilot, who's designated crewman 1, came in to report, Wally Schirra said, for the third time, go. We're T-minus 3 minutes in holding. This is Gemini Launch Control.
And we've just heard from Houston that radar at Eglin Field is working again, so that little bit of concern has passed, although they were going to launch whether it worked or not. As we were saying a moment ago, this was the Mercury configuration, a tower with the pyrotechnics in it, carried the entire spacecraft away from the Atlas booster used in Mercury, and this entire thing was blown into the air. Parachutes came out, and it descended with the pilot still in it back to the Cape area. Now this is an ejection system. They'll go back to this for Apollo, and 3 men will be in the spacecraft atop the Saturn booster. The reason that they went to the ejection seat system for Gemini was partially because of the types of fuel used. The fuels in the Atlas are explosive. The fuels in the Saturn will be explosive. These fuels are not explosive. They are hypergolic. They burn upon contact, cannot explode. Now, they burn so fast that the effect is almost that of explosion, but almost is the key word. It is not a great burst of flame. So these men can leave this spacecraft and come down in a fairly close to a fire and explosion of the booster without danger, it is believed. Whereas in the Mercury and the Saturn Apollo program, they have to go further away from any disaster on the pad. That's part of the reason for this system. Another part has to do with aerodynamics and weight and that sort of thing, but that was the key factor that made it possible for them to get by in Titan without the escape tower on top of the rocket. CBS News color coverage of Gemini 6 and Gemini 7 will continue in a moment after a pause for station identification.
This is CBS. Project Gemini, an attempted rendezvous in space. From the CBS News Space Center in New York, here again is Walter Cronkite.
Even our announcements have become more cautious. We now say an attempted rendezvous in space instead of Gemini 6-7, a rendezvous in space. It doesn't indicate any lack of confidence, however, in the program on our side. As Chuck Von Fremd said at Cape Kennedy a little earlier this morning, there is a feeling now that this time everything will be all right. After 2 attempts to get Gemini 6 up, first to rendezvous with an unmanned Agena on October 25th, and then that breathtaking abort on the pad on Sunday when they already had ignition, and then the mission had to be scrubbed. Chuck Von Fremd can give us the late word out the Cape as the count stands at T-minus 3 minutes and holding as planned, a hold as planned until launch time of 8:37. Chuck?
Walter, everything continues to be absolutely go here. The weather is holding up very, very nicely at this point. There doesn't seem to be any problem in the worldwide tracking network. Things going along just beautifully. And Walter, now back to you.
And let's check in with Mission Control Center at Houston, where our man Nelson Benton is standing by. Nelson?
Walter, one of the things we were worried about yesterday was that tracking ship near the Philippines, the Coastal Sentry, whether or not it would work. It had some problems, but the word from Mission Control this morning is that the CSQ is back in operation, so this could mean that if that rendezvous comes off as it should, we may get the word perhaps 10 minutes earlier than we had hoped for, rather than having to wait for the spacecraft to pass over Hawaii. Everything is go at Mission Control, and we're waiting for the launch. Waller?
Nelson, you bring up an interesting point there. The rendezvous should take place over the Indian Ocean at about 2:26 p.m. This afternoon. If everything is exactly as planned, then it could there could be quite a bit of change in that actual rendezvous time. But if everything is absolutely as hoped for, it would be 2:26 over the Indian Ocean. There will not be, or actually over about Indonesia at that point, I think it is. Now, that means that they will not be in touch with a ground station at the precise moment of of rendezvous. That is, when they get within about 3,000 feet of each other. So any report to us of the success of rendezvous will be delayed a few minutes until they pass over the next tracking station. At about 5 minutes after rendezvous, they're over coastal Century, Quebec. And now that also depends upon how good communications are. You know how some days you can bring in distant stations on your radio, some days you can't. Well, it's just the same with this highly technical equipment on the tracking stations around the world, this series of stations under the orbits of the astronauts, and exact time when acquisition comes, that is when they are first able to get in touch with the spacecraft, changes. It can change by the minute to the hour or the day. So we don't know exactly what time we will be hearing from coastal Century, Quebec, and it will be hearing in turn from the astronauts that the rendezvous has been achieved. It should be within 4 or 5 minutes, however. Yesterday, coastal Century, Quebec was out for a while, and there was some danger that we weren't going to hear at all for that period of time, that pass, and wouldn't hear until the spacecraft was in touch with Hawaii another 5 or 6 minutes later. However, now it looks like we'll get the report around, perhaps 2:30, 3:34, 35, that rendezvous has been achieved, if indeed all goes well. The count, T-minus 3 minutes, and holding as planned. The count to be picked up at 34 minutes after the hour for a planned launch at 8:37 a.m. Everything going well, tracking stations reporting in order, the recovery vessels standing by in the areas where they must be, the astronauts buttoned into the spacecraft, the Titan booster standing there having been checked out now as ready for launch, and the weather is go as well. CBS News color coverage of Gemini 6 and Gemini 7 will continue in a moment. Back here at our CBS News Space Center, this is Walter Cronkite for the report of the launch of Gemini 7 at 8:37 a.m. this morning, just about, 10, 15, 16, 17 minutes from now. This mission of Gemini 6 and 7 will achieve, it is hoped, the first rendezvous of manned space vehicles. They're already, in the flight of Gemini 7, has established the longest flight in space, and this morning, shortly after midnight, the Gemini 7 astronauts, Borman and Lovell, set a new space record. They had been up in space longer than all of the Soviet space flights combined. Also, they've achieved another first. As we reported Sunday, they've flown for the first time in an underwear environment. They've flown in their underwear, taking off their new lightweight space suits and proving that that is perfectly feasible and that it is more comfortable for an astronaut. They are getting a little bit weary, it has been indicated, as might be expected, in that cooped-up spacecraft of theirs, hardly bigger than the front seat of a compact car. They've been living in since a week ago Saturday. They're in their 11th day now, nearing their 12th day. And they say that they're feeling a little bit crummy. They notice that the days are getting a little bit longer than they were before. G7 splashdown is now scheduled for about 2:30 in the afternoon, or rather 8:30 in the morning on Saturday. The splashdown of Gemini 6, if it gets off on schedule this morning and achieves its rendezvous today, will come about the same time tomorrow morning. The rendezvous should come at around 2:30 this afternoon. We'll be reporting that fully as we get the reports from the spacecraft. They'll be meeting at some 17,500 miles an hour as they whirl around space, although of course their relative speed will be down to about 1/3 of a mile an hour as they close in that last 1,000 feet. The rendezvous comes at about 185-mile height over the Mariana Islands in the western Pacific. Where they will fly in formation for around 4 to 5 hours with intricate maneuvers in plane and out of plane, that is in orbit and out of orbit, as the Gemini 6 maneuvers around the Gemini 7. This is a picture from our television cameras aboard the Wasp, and here's Dallas Townsend.
This is Dallas Townsend aboard the aircraft carrier Wasp. It's a fine, bright morning out here in the Atlantic, and the Wasp is on station about 1,120 nautical miles east of Cape Kennedy. We're ready to do double duty to recover GT6 if it's launched and has to be aborted in the first few minutes of flight, and also to recover GT7 if necessary. Up here on the flight deck a few minutes ago, we watched the launching of the planes heading for their recovery stations to the north. Bernard Eisman, suppose you take it from there.
Dallas, just 45 minutes before scheduled launch time, the first helicopter, number 51. That's the primary search helicopter, left the Wasp's flight deck, headed for station 124 miles north of this ship. Within seconds after the departure of 51, number 56, the prime swim helicopter, and then the relay aircraft, the one who will provide on-scene communication back to the Cape and back to the spacecraft. Number 56 carrying the team of swimmers who will go into the water and attach the flotation collar. Dallas, the last plane to leave was the air boss, the on-scene commander, and you saw him go.
Yes, indeed. He's being launched right now from the port hydraulic catapult. There he is in plane number 0, the air boss, Commander David Barksdale, who's commander of Air Group 51. He will be the on-scene commander, and he was leaving the flight deck now, heading for station 120 miles to the north. He will be the on-scene commander. The flight deck 4 levels below us is fairly quiet now, but it will be anything but quiet when the time comes for recovery, because that's where chances are the astronauts will first set foot on the carrier. Bernie Eisman, you'll have a close-up look at that event.
Obviously, the ideal way to bring in the astronauts is in their spacecraft, but in the event that doesn't happen, as it's unusual that it will, they'll come aboard in a helicopter, and they'll be deposited on deck just at about this point. Dallas, you'll be the first to see them coming aboard in the helicopter when that helicopter is still quite a way out.
Yes, indeed, Bernie. Swim 1, the prime recovery helicopter, will approach the carrier from the west off the port bow. We'll probably see it coming in fairly rapidly, and then it will slow down and come in over the forward flight deck, and it will settle down on the deck at the position known as Spot 4. That's just about on a line with the forward part of the carrier's island. After the rotors have stopped, the astronauts will get out and walk aft a few yards. They'll be escorted by Don Sulkin, head of the NASA recovery team on board. At one end of a red carpet run out from the superstructure, they'll be greeted by Vice Admiral Charles Weakley, commander of anti-submarine warfare forces of the Atlantic Fleet, and Rear Admiral William Leonard, commander of the Western Atlantic Recovery Forces. They'll also be greeted by Captain Gordon Hartley, the skipper of the Wasp. Bernie Eisman, pick up the story there.
From that point, Dallas, they'll head from the flight deck through the Marine Honor Guard with the Navy ship's band playing and down to the hatchway that takes them to the flight deck escalator rather, down through that door to the escalator and down to the hangar bay on their way to sick bay. And that's where you'll be able to pick them up again.
Yes, Bernie, when they get onto the hangar deck, they will cross it, going diagonally from starboard to port, over to the hatch and the ladder leading to sick bay. They'll cross at just about this point amidships. Sick bay is 1 level below the hangar deck.
I hear nothing.
And there, Dr. Howard Minners and other members of the NASA medical team will conduct the physical examination. It will take about 4.5 hours, and it will not be very extensive in the case of Schirra and Stafford. Back to Bernie Eisman.
After that long time in sick bay, because that is their primary destination aboard this ship, they'll stay about 24 hours, no more hopefully, and then from this flight deck, they'll depart again back to the Cape and Houston. This is Bernard Eisman aboard the carrier Wasp.
Those are remarkably good pictures from the Wasp. They're being relayed to us by early bird satellite the first time we'll have an opportunity to see the astronauts return to the deck of the carrier. In covering Project Gemini and Mercury for that matter, we've been able to show you just about every aspect of the flight except the re-entry and the recovery, hundreds of miles at sea. Well, this time, if all goes well, we'll show you live the astronauts coming back onto the deck of the carrier. Getting that picture back is indeed a mammoth operation, and pool reporter Bernie Eisman has that story.
This veteran aircraft carrier, prime recovery ship for the flights of Gemini 6 and 7, station and transmitter. We're equipped to send live, minute by minute, as it's happening, the recovery of both teams of astronauts. 100 television engineers and technicians and almost 100 tons of equipment are aboard. With cameras strategically placed all over the ship, we hope to be able, for the first time, to see recovery as it happens. Here's how we hope it'll work. The cameras and microphones on board transmit the picture and sound to this mobile unit parked on the Wasp's hangar deck. From there, the the signal goes to an IT&T unit right alongside. IT&T then feeds the report through this giant 30-foot-high transmitting dish that will send the signal 22,300 miles high into space, aiming at the tiny 85-pound early bird satellite up there in fixed orbit. When the signal is received and translated by early bird, the program is relayed to the receiving station in Andover, Maine, where it's fed to the television networks. The time involved from ship to TV screen in your home, milliseconds. The cost of rigging the WASP this way, some $300,000. The cost of using the satellite, some $22,000 an hour. But if we can report to you directly, as it happens, the recovery, if we can succeed, the flights of Gemini 6 and 7 will also be history-making events in television journalism. Bernard Eisman aboard the USS Wasp.
And the scheduled launch of Gemini 6 is now just 10 minutes away. The count is T-minus 3 minutes and holding as planned, running down toward the last 2 minutes of the planned 25-minute hold. A hold which actually has so far not proved necessary, a hold that was built into the countdown procedure in case anything had gone wrong, so there'd be plenty of time to make adjustments, it would be hoped, before that precise and critical second when Gemini 6 has to get off. These launchings for Rendezvous have to be a lot more precise than a launching for a simple orbital flight. Since the launch must come at the precise second in time when the Earth, Cape Kennedy, the precise point, is in the position below the present orbit of Gemini 7, so that with a minimum expenditure of fuel, a minimum change in the orbital plane, Gemini 6 can get in the same path as Gemini 7 for what it is expected to will be a 103,000-mile chase through space through 3.5 orbits until on the 4th orbit over the Marianas in the Western Pacific, Rendezvous is accomplished. And now with the count still T-minus 3 and holding, scheduled to be picked up in just 4 minutes from now, with the launch to come just 8 minutes from now. Let's go back to the Cape and Chuck Von Frem. Chuck?
Walter, out there stands Gemini 6. From 7,000 feet away, the several hundred reporters here at the press site and see it in a slightly different perspective than our viewers see it in their homes. On the screen there, it looks pretty close. Out there, you realize that it is almost 2 miles away, but it still, while slim, looks potentially mighty powerful. The weather is excellent. Everything's still go here. Walter, you were explaining with a model some minutes ago about the Titan II booster and its hypergolic fuels, the fact that it burns rather than explodes, as compared to the Atlas of the Mercury days and the Saturn for the Apollo, which is still to come. I think one thing that has been widely unreported, but probably is very true, is that the Sunday mission, when the engines actually ignited, the only reason that mission was saved is because astronaut Wally Schirra was very, very much aware of the fact that the booster underneath him would burn rather than explode. On one occasion, he told me that, at least in the case of the Gemini program, he could delay until the last split second before pulling the D-ring, which would eject him and his pilot, Tom Stafford, because he could wait until he felt fire in the seat of his pants, is the way Wally put it. This, of course, he could not have done with an explosive booster beneath him. And so possibly that's why we can still come back here today and try again. Walter?
And that's why, Chuck, too, the escape system for the Gemini is a man-controlled system as opposed to the automatic abort sensing system of the Mercury program. In that case, that system was so sensitive that if anything had gone wrong, such as did go wrong on the pad on Sunday, it automatically, in the speed, reacting in the speed faster than a man pulling his hand away from a hot stove, in that length of time, it would have triggered the escape tower and pulled a Mercury capsule away from its Atlas booster. Now here's Paul Haney in Houston.
Hours, 1 minute into the flight of 7, and we're still in our minus 3 minute hold on 6. Assuming a 37 minute 23 seconds liftoff on 6, we are now predicting that rendezvous would take place at 5 hours, 48 minutes, and 51 seconds later. This would be in an area northwest of Guam, over the Marianas Islands. 7 at this time is swinging across the states, and we've heard very little conversation there, but let's check and see if we're getting any. I'm advised that there has been none. We really expect none in this pass across the states. The crew has the pointing angles, and will watch very carefully for that 6 liftoff. They saw it the other day. They also saw the shutdown. This is Gemini Control, Houston. This is Gemini Control, Houston.
And you can see on our Colesman map there, or could a moment ago, that the Gemini 7 has passed over the Guaymas station, is in touch with the Cape itself. It's just about over the Cape, and presumably the G7 astronauts Borman and Lovell will see ignition and perhaps the takeoff of Gemini 6 to pursue them, even as they saw that abortive ignition on Sunday. It's now at T-minus 3 minutes still, with another minute to go before the count is resumed, a count which has been deliberately held for 25 minutes for a launch at 8:37 a.m. 8:37 at 26 to be precise. 26 seconds after 8:37, the liftoff should occur. That's 3.2 seconds after the ignition takes place. We are waiting for further word from the Cape that the count has been resumed, and shortly after that we will be going to the Cape and listening for their account of the takeoff from the Cape Control Center, the Launch Control Center. As you can see, the weather is good at Cape Kennedy. Everything is go for this mission, all the tracking stations around the world. And at the recovery ships and the recovery sites, where if anything should go wrong, Gemini 6 would come down. Gemini 7 is just about approaching the Cape Kennedy at this point, and will be just approximately overhead when the launch takes place. This is a familiar scene to us now, the erector lying there in the foreground, the umbilical cord over to the left, the umbilical tower, that is. That's the tower that carries the life equipment for the astronauts, and that equipment necessary for the booster before it actually takes off. That tower remains right there as the Gemini spacecraft atop its big 430,000-pound thrusting engines rockets into space. 430,000 pounds on takeoff and 100,000 pounds of thrust in the second stage. The count should have been resumed now, and we expect to hear from Jack King at Cape Kennedy that it has. He'll be coming up in just a moment. Our clock shows
This is Gemini Launch Control at the Cape. We have just resumed our count at T-minus 3 minutes. This was some 15 seconds ago. We're now at 2 minutes and 41 seconds and counting on the Gemini 6 mission. The count was picked up right on time, leading to an ignition of the Gemini launch vehicle at 8:37 and 23 seconds a.m. Eastern Standard Time, if all goes well, through the remainder of the count. We had a final status check once again prior to resuming the count, and got a go from all elements concerned with the mission. All is still looking good at the present time. At this point in the count, we give our final feed to the computer for the guidance system. This is the final information to the launch vehicle, and of course also to the spacecraft, to give us the correct launch time and the correct parameters for the flight. All is still looking very well at the present time. A launch azimuth for the flight of 81.4 degrees has now been placed in the guidance system. We're now at T-minus 1 minute and 45 seconds and counting. T-minus 1 minute and 40 seconds and counting at the present time. Everything's still looking well. During the last 10 seconds, astronaut Alan Bean, who is the spacecraft capsule communicator, will count down for astronauts Wally Schirra and Tom Stafford in the spacecraft. As we reach 0 in the countdown, the engines will ignite, and some 3.4 seconds thereafter, we will get liftoff for Gemini 6. Now 1 minute and 12 seconds and counting. During these final phases of the count, actually during the 90 seconds down, we have several highlights in which one of the key ones, of course, is the power transfer. Now 1 minute and counting on Gemini 6. power transfer, where we transfer into internal power on the launch vehicle. We have conserved those batteries up to this time. The spacecraft already is on internal power. Now T-minus 45 seconds and counting. T-minus 40 seconds and counting, all still looking good. T-minus 30. All quiet on the communications at the present time. T-minus 20. T-minus 15. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Trajectory looks very good. Goal program complete, Schirra says. Guidance says we've got proper roll and pitch.
That is its turned over a little bit on its side.
Flight dynamics and surgeon are both happy.
Means the medical report's good. Both astronauts in good shape. Oh, Gemini 6 is good.
1 minute. Our velocity 1,342 miles an hour.
Another 9 seconds they go through maximum dynamic pressure, the next critical point in this flight. It's when they take maximum buffeting. If there are any structural difficulties with the spacecraft and the booster, they would become apparent. They're going through max Q now.
Spacecraft continues
Looks good.
to pull all the consoles here. He gets happy reports from each one of them. Looks good, looks good.
It's about 8.5 miles up now, and that's a beautiful picture from our VU cameras.
Mark 1 plus 40.
First stage cutoff should come now in about 45 seconds.
Schirra says he's got an update. Mark 2 minutes. 2 minutes. Our velocity now 3,700 miles an hour. Tanks are go for staging.
Means they're ready to turn off those big 430,000-pound boosters. They've done their job. They've gotten them up that high. Now the second stage, 100,000 pounds of thrust will take over in about another 10 seconds. We should see that staging.
Coming up on staging, 2 minutes, 25 seconds. We've got staging.
We've got a report on staging, but we didn't see it. There it is now.
Schirra called it. The thrust looks good on stage 2.
Sounded like that staging report was just a little bit early.
You can see it falling and turning on mine.
At that point, the first stage engine cut off.
Steering. The radio guidance has taken over, and we'll yaw the vehicle slightly to the right, bring it around some 4 degrees to put it in the proper angle. And at 3 minutes into the flight, everything looks good on the ground and in the spacecraft.
At that point of first stage cut off, the engines stop, and the second stage takes over. The power of that 100,000 pounds of thrust of the second stage blows the first stage off of the complex booster and spacecraft. And now the second stage is taken over, and it continues until 5 minutes and 41 seconds into the flight. We're now 3 minutes 41 seconds into the flight. It'll have 2 minutes to go. This is a critical maneuver now. This
3 minutes and 47 seconds, and the performance is right on the mark so far. No deviation up or down in Wally Schirra's voice, just as calm as it was the other day when he had that shutdown.
slight yaw maneuver now to put the
Fido says we're right down the middle.
Gemini 6 into proper orbit, and it sounds like that's going well, too. Once they get into that orbit, the calculations will be
Craft
made.
is polling all his positions now for the sustainer engine cutoff status check, and everybody is go. Elliott C advises 6, he's go. Shiraz says so are they.
I think everybody's taking a very deep sigh of relief that Gemini 6 is up and going well.
Tom Stafford advises the attitude errors are 0.
This is our animation of what's happening with that second stage burning, as it will now for another 41 seconds.
5 minutes into the flight mark, and our velocity is 13,360 miles an hour, or about 82 miles high.
That's nautical miles. We showed you on the screen statute miles.
Mark 0.8. We've achieved 80% of the desired velocity. We'll make up the rest in the next 15 seconds. Flight dynamics officer says he's happy. 5 minutes, 33 seconds.
They use in these missions nautical miles, you know, for space flight. A nautical mile.
Go. Second stage cutoff. You can hear a little bit of applause here in this room.
That means they're...
says you can't do any better than that.
Means they're on the way. Orbital insertion is just about to take place.
His IVI readings, preparatory to thrust, and he gets an enthusiastic and reassuring "you are go" from Elliott C.
It is go for the Gemini 6 mission. It is there and on its way in this 103,000-mile chase of Gemini 7. So the United States at this moment has 4 men in orbit. That has never been done before.
And they have left the launch vehicle.
You saw the spacecraft roll there. Perhaps you noticed it. They, in flight, in the powered phase of flight, are flying head down. And as soon as they get separation, they roll the vehicle, so they're now flying heads up, although it doesn't really make any difference in that weightless state in which they now find themselves, whether they're flying head down or head up. It's just a little more convenient, perhaps, for the maneuvering of the spacecraft. It's the 0 position, 0 pitch, 0 yaw, 0 roll.
11.5 seconds in leaving the vehicle. Shiraz now calling out his incremental velocity indicator readings. And Guidance Officer Charlie Parker stands and gives a big OK signal with his right hand.
Obviously, there's exultation in mission control. You can tell it in Paul Haney's voice and in what he's describing down there. And you even heard a cheer. I've never heard that before leak out over his microphone as he sits in the back of the Mission Control Center right behind the flight director, Chris Kraft. This on our Coleman map shows approximately what is happening there at the moment.
This is Houston. We have an initial orbit of 87 by 141. This is being relayed up to 6 right now. 87 by 141. And as the man said, you can't come any closer than that.
That's right on the target.
We have now the launch tape, which we will start at T-minus 90 seconds, carry you through the powered phase of flight.
Gemini Network, this is Houston Network. We have picked up the count. We're at T-minus 2 minutes, 35 seconds on my mark. Mark.
Secondary guidance light off.
Launch vehicle is transferring to internal power, minus 130.
Roger.
Stand by for engine gibling in 5 seconds.
Roger.
It's 120. Minus 1 minute.
Roger.
Out my mark, 20 seconds. Mark. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition. Liftoff.
That's a real one.
Houston.
Roger, roll.
This is tracking.
Roger.
Pressure relief.
50 seconds. Roger. Cabin pressure, Gemini 6. Roger. Roger, Wally. Mark, 1 plus 40.
Roger, mode 2.
Roger, mode 2. Roger, update. Trajectory's looking real good.
Very good. I've got a good second stage.
Roger. Roger, update.
Staging.
Roger, staging.
Switching high rate. Guidance initiate must be in, it's real slim.
Roger, guidance initiate. Steering looks good from here, Gemini 6.
Altitude looks like it's green. I saw some flash on that stage.
Roger.
Altitude arrows are all zero.
Roger.
Alright, altitude arrows are 0.
Roger. You're right down the line, Gemini 6.
Very good.
You go from here, Gemini 6.
You got a good stop go from us. It looks great.
Roger, Wally.
Altitude arrows are still 0.
Didn't copy that, Tom. Stand by for point 8.
Roger.
Mark, point 8, V over VR. Roger.
We're at a 39, we'll burn 59. She's looking fairly stable here. Stable for separation.
Gemini 6, you are go.
Ready? Man. Bearings are gone. Here's 72, 25730.
Gemini 6, your 1 alpha time is 17 plus 02, and I copied your insertion.
Gemini Control Houston here. The orbit of 6 has now been corrected based on better data coming in from Bermuda. It shows 87-mile perigee, an apogee of 144 miles. The spacecraft Gemini 7, which is leading 6 by about 1,200 miles as they move across the eastern Atlantic right now, was just advised that Frank Borman came back with a one-word answer: wonderful. We're 12 minutes, 55 seconds into the flight of 6. And Wally Schirra said as they moved across the Atlantic, the only problem he could see was he had a little smoke on his window. It might have been some of that Florida haze or fog that surrounded the area. It's probably a facetious comment. All in all, they're entirely satisfied with the performance of 6 in this first lap across the Atlantic. This is Gemini Control Houston.
With the correction of that orbit, that means that they're in a 100 by 165 statute mile orbit, and that's almost precisely on the money. 100 miles was exactly the apogee that they wanted, and 168 miles was the high point. Now, about 1 hour and 35 minutes into the flight, just about the end of the first orbit, as the spacecraft is over New Orleans, Schirra will do just a little bit of correcting to make that orbit exactly 168, 100 by 168. And it's not going to take very much correction to do that, about 1 foot per second of thrust, they call it, just a change of speed around 2/3 of a mile per hour. That's at the apogee. They fire at the apogee to raise the perigee. The perigee, and that will make this correction to the 168 mile orbit. The astronauts are now around 1,200 miles behind the Gemini 7 and considerably lower than Gemini 7 as they both approach the west coast of Africa. The next important function for Gemini 6 now is to get its go, no-go from Hawaii for at least 15 orbits. In other words, the word that that everything aboard the spacecraft and in its orbital relationship is such that it can remain aloft for at least 1 day until tomorrow morning. There doesn't seem any question, unless there are some difficulties aboard the spacecraft in the next hour, that they will get that go for at least 1 day. And then their first maneuver comes over New Orleans at approximately, what will it be now, 10 minutes after 10. They will raise that perigee just a bit for a 168 to 100 mile orbit. Their next major maneuver would then come at about 10:55 in the morning, midway over the Indian Ocean, when on the second orbit, Schirra will make the first major maneuver. He'll fire his aft rockets for some, with some 53 feet per second. That's 36 and a third miles per hour. That's a posigrade maneuver, in other words, a forward maneuver to raise his perigee from that 100-mile low point to 134 miles. He makes a second mid-course correction to finally bring his spacecraft into the same orbit, but 15 miles below the orbit of Gemini 7, and then finally the terminal or closing maneuver around 2:30 p.m. our time. And certainly the way things are going now, it looks like a perfect mission is on its way, that they'll be able to carry out those maneuvers as planned. The only mention of any difficulty at all, a very minor one, is flights, some hazing over the window, and the theory at the moment, although it's only theory, is that maybe it is the salt air at Cape Kennedy that collects on the window at takeoff, and despite the great acceleration of the spacecraft through the atmosphere, seems to cling there. That may be what's doing it, but the scientists at Houston and the Cape admit they're not sure. They're having the same trouble with Gemini 7, incidentally. CBS News color coverage of Gemini 6 and Gemini 7 will continue in a moment. Some varying degree below, but around 85 miles below Gemini 7. It is catching up at a rapid rate, orbital mechanics being such that the lower orbit is a faster orbit, of course, around the Earth, just like the inside track of a race course, and they're beginning to catch up even now with Gemini 7. Gemini 7 was about 270 miles downrange when Gemini 6 was launched just 20 minutes ago, and we have not had word that Frank Borman and Jim Lovell saw the launch of Gemini 6. We're waiting to see if they did. They might just possibly have, but that is a rather great range for them to have seen it. They did see, you know, the first burst of the rocket engines on last Sunday, but now they have the word that Gemini 6 is go. And those were, that's a wonderful and probably historic space quote from Wally Schirra. His words were, "We have a big fat go from us. It looks great." A big fat go for Gemini 6 now toward a big fat rendezvous, it's hoped, at around 2:30 this afternoon. Bill Stout and Bob Sharp out there at St. Louis, the McDonnell Aircraft Plant, who I assume are just as elated as all the rest of us at this successful flight so far, are going to give us some information, I gather, Bill, on these initial orbital maneuvers Gemini 6 will be performing.
I'm sure, Walter, that in this full-scale duplicate with all the switches and dials, instruments, gauges, and so forth, that Bob can give us some idea of exactly what they have to do in these early minutes of the flight, aside from watching and worrying and being delighted, Bob? What would Wally Schirra in command pilot's seat have done, for instance, when they talk about rolling the spacecraft over so that they're sitting up instead of sitting down, facing down?
Of course, at insertion, they are laying on their side. That is, if my thumb is out here, as their head, they're laying on their side, they separate and roll up. And doing this procedure, they turn on their ohms or their attitude control system power, unstow their maneuver controller. Then they proceed to jettison their fairing and then fire the separate spacecraft pyrotechnics and start thrusting it, which at that time their IVI counts down. It sees 10 foot per second on it. It counts down slowly until it gets to 0. Then they finish thrusting. During this process, they also start rolling to a heads-up position since they're now separated from the booster, beginning a very slow roll, as we can see on the attitude ball here and in this simulation.
We keep talking about ohms. These are simply the small rockets and thrusters that they use to move the spacecraft around, right?
Yes, you can see them on the adapter. The lights on this simulation simulate the ohms thrusters firing. I notice there's very few of them firing right at this moment because it's a very simple, non-complex maneuver.
We'll see a lot of firing, though, when it comes to the point of moving up into the same plane as Gemini 7, won't we?
Yes, on their attitude thrusters, we'll see a fair amount of activity anytime they're controlling attitude. And of course, this initial part of the flight, they'll be aligning the platform at frequent intervals here during the catch-up process, which requires very fine corrections, which they use the thrusters in the pulse mode to give a very fine or a very real vernier type of control. And they'll be using them also during the in-plane and out-of-plane maneuvers they'll make to change their phasing and adjust their orbits to match the desired one.
What does that mean, that kind of maneuver, in-plane, out-of-plane?
Well, the in-plane maneuver is one that's used to change the velocity in orbit, either to speed it up or to slow it down and adjust the altitude of the orbit. The out-of-plane maneuvers are done at 90 degrees to their direction of flight. In other words, they'll turn the spacecraft through an angle of 90 degrees, and this serves to actually then tip the plane of the orbit slightly when they make this maneuver.
They can really move around up there, as the flight plan calls for later in the day.
Gentlemen, excuse me a moment. Here's Paul Haney at Mission Control, Houston.
8 seconds into the flight of 6, 258 hours and 30 minutes into the flight of 7. And there's a lot of busy traffic over Africa this morning. The Canary station found out how busy things can be first. He read out the 7 systems as it preceded the 6 spacecraft by about 1,200 miles. And then he turned to 6 and had some brief conversation. Just a passing note between the 2 spacecraft, 7's radio sounds a little louder and sharper than 6's, but that's not unusual. That sometimes it takes a half a rev to get the proper volume control adjustments made. All in all, both spacecraft are doing fine. It was business as usual over Kano just a few minutes ago. Elliott C. contacting 7, giving them a flight plan update. The best information we have now is that 6 will have to perform about a 31 foot per second burn to make these planes absolutely coincide. That's almost immeasurable from the standpoint of degrees. It's down on the order of a few seconds. That burn, there will be, first of all, a height adjustment by 6 just south of New Orleans on this first pass. That calls for a 13.5 foot per second burn. Then at 2 hours, 18 minutes into the flight, there will be a perigee adjustment by 6 of 59.5 feet per second. At 2 hours and 42 minutes, 18 seconds into the flight, 6 will adjust its plane. That'll be a 31.3 per second burn. And at 3 hours, 47 minutes and 30 36 seconds. 6 will circularize its orbit with a 44.3 foot per second burn. And the terminal phase initiate, that is 130 degrees away from the rendezvous point, is to begin at 5 hours, 16 minutes, 33 seconds into the flight, with a 33.7 foot per second burn by 6. And the final maneuver, the terminal phase final, out-timed at 5 hours, 48 minutes, 40 seconds. That'll be a 42.5 foot per second burn. We have now some tape conversation with both 6 and 7 as we went by the Canary station. Let's have the tape.
Standing by for IVIs.
Okay, to the IVIs are 11 forward, 2 right, 2 down.
Copy, 11 forward, 2 right, 2 down.
That's affirmative.
Project Gemini, Rendezvous in Space. Now from the CBS News Space Center in New York, Walter Cronkite.
This looks like a big day for the American space program, for the world space program for that matter. Gemini 6, after that perfect launch this morning, is closing with Gemini 7. Every maneuver has gone perfectly so far. They're less than 100 miles apart, 88 miles apart in the last report just a moment ago as they began whirling over northern Brazil. And their actual rendezvous maneuvers, the final closing maneuvers, will come in the next 25 minutes, with the final closure about an hour from now. But so far, everything's gone well. The radars are locked on between the two spacecraft. They're facing each other with Gemini 6 about 17 miles below Gemini 7 and some 88 miles in total range, somewhat behind Gemini 7 still, coming up under Gemini 7 until when these terminal maneuvers begin, he will go ahead and up on the same level with Gemini 7. The radar lock-on has taken place. They're talking back and forth between each other, but we've had no confirmation that they have seen each other, although that would be anticipated almost any moment now. They will be out of range of ground stations very shortly, and whether we get word that they actually have seen each other at the same moment that exciting event takes place, we don't know as yet. It will depend at just what point that is. Of course, that isn't programmed precisely. The field of vision, the depth and distance of vision of man 185 miles above the Earth, where these people are hurtling along at 17,500 miles an hour, has never been precisely established. However, the acquisition lights, these big powerful strobe lights on top of the Gemini 7 are on, winking at Gemini 6. The radar has locked on. They have communication. As we say, the astronauts are talking to each other. This American first already established of 4 astronauts in space at the same time in 2 separate vehicles. The Russians put 3 men up in a single vehicle. We now have the record for that as well. Let's take a look with our Kohlsman map and with our IBM computers and graphic representations of just what has happened so far since that magnificent, absolutely perfect launch. It went off, as a matter of fact, just 71 1/1000ths of a second off of the schedule at 8:37 this morning. Here is the representation of the Gemini 7 and Gemini 6 on Gemini 6's first revolution. The first maneuver came as they came back around over the United States on the first trip. On this trip around, they were 1,200 miles apart, and Gemini 6 was some 85 miles below Gemini 7. But now, at this point, just south of New Orleans, the first maneuver took place. And Ed Byman, over at the IBM computer, the Graphic Processing Center, can tell us, Ed, what happened in that first correction.
Walter, we have a program brought into the machine which is on display on the tube you see in front of me. We show the 2 orbits of Gemini, 6 and 7. Gemini is shown at its perigee position, ready for thrusting to add some velocity and thereby increase its apogee. I'll simulate that by recognizing a symbol on the screen. which will show the thrusting appearing and a corresponding orbit being traced on the screen. As it happens, adding velocity at a perigee position does not cause them to go faster in the same direction, but rather causes them to travel in a somewhat larger path. And now we see the vehicles traveling in that path.
Well, now at that point, they were just south of New Orleans, and Gemini 7 was about 750 miles ahead, I believe it is, Ed, of Gemini 6. And they go on around, as we see here, on their the second revolution for Gemini 6, the 116th revolution for Gemini 7. The next maneuver, actually we don't show it here, but at that time G7 was turning around to face G6 with its transponder, its radar, and then midway over the Indian Ocean on that second orbit, at this point that you see here now, Schirra was firing his aft rockets for another maneuver. And Ed, what happened there?
Well, here I've called in another program to show now Gemini 6 at its apogee position 1/2 a revolution around the world later. Again, they add velocity in their forward direction, increasing their speed, once more causing them to travel in a larger orbit. This time, however, they raise their perigee, as you can see here in the diagram that's being traced. We'll select that orbit, and once more they'll travel now in that path, somewhat larger path than they had before. This has the effect of increasing their time around the world or slowing down their catch-up rate.
At this point, Ed, they were about 510 miles, according to our calculation, behind Gemini 7. And away they kept whirring. Of course, they didn't stop, as we are, but they were on their way around toward their third revolution. There was another performance, though, over the far western Pacific on that second orbit, and this was a very critical one. Ed Byman can tell us about that.
Well, here we see still another program. This time we show a two-dimensional view of the orbital planes of Gemini 6 and 7. They were going to do a maneuver to change their plane, that is, align the plane, orbital plane of Gemini 6 with that of 7. I've signaled the computer to reorient the picture on the screen to, in effect, take us in a different position in space. And you'll notice we've exaggerated the angles between the two planes. We in fact show them at 45 degrees apart, when in actuality there were some 7/100ths of a degree apart or thereabouts. Now if I back the vehicles up somewhat and let them come in toward the intersection point of these two planes, you'll notice that Gemini 6 was reorienting itself to get into a position 90 degrees to their direction of travel. In this attitude, they can use their aft thrusters to change the direction of travel of Gemini 6 and get it into the same plane as Gemini 7. We show that by stopping Gemini 6 at the intersection point. There you see the thrusting appearing, and the plane is brought back into a coplanar position with 7. And then, of course, the vehicle that proceeds on its way and is now in a coplanar condition.
Ed, the amount of thrust it takes to do that is clearly indicated by the fact that that was such a small orbital change. Fortunately, Gemini 6 had been launched into just about the right orbit, but it still took 31 feet per second to just make that little tiny bit of change, and that's 3 times or 4 times as much as we ever did in Gemini 3, which was our first orbital plane change. All right, thank you, Ed. And now let's take a look at the Holzman map again as to where we proceeded from that point. That was Revolution 2 over the far western Pacific, just about over Indonesia. They came around now, and here they had to make another little change, as Ed Byman over at our IBM Graphic Processing Center showed us on that altitude change. Well, that didn't quite do the job, and they came just a little bit short of what they needed in that altitude change, so they fixed it with an extra maneuver added at this point to just about where they had the first altitude change, and this was a 1 foot per second burn. Very little change. In fact, it's so little, 1 foot per second, and the actual amount of thrust was given in less than just barely a half a second. So they called it a tweaking burn, a tweaking maneuver. Just a tweak on the jets to get it up just a little bit higher, not much. Now they went around for Revolution 3. And as they got near the African continent, they were preparing for another and a most critical maneuver, again over the Indian Ocean. Ed Byman again at IBM. Ed?
Well, here we've brought in a program to show this circularization maneuver. This is done with Gemini 6 at its apogee position, and once again the astronauts would thrust to velocity in their direction of travel. We see that once more on the screen, simulating thrusting and tracing on the screen an orbit corresponding to that thrusting. That is a circular orbit now, concentric with the orbit of Gemini 7. And now if we select that path and cause the vehicles to move on our screen, we see that they will always be some 17 miles difference between the two orbits. After that, they're prepared to do the terminal maneuver.
And can you show us, Ed, the terminal maneuver on there?
Yes, we can. We take another liberty here, Walter, to change the size of our circles on the screen, merely to demonstrate the terminal maneuver with more clarity.
Let me make a point here, Ed, that terminal maneuver is scheduled to begin about 15 minutes from now, at about 1:55 Eastern Standard Time, and it goes on for better than a half hour before they get into their close proximity of 1,000 feet or so. Okay, Ed.
All right. As the vehicles approach this particular position, the astronauts would have reoriented Gemini 6 so that they had Gemini 7 in their line of sight. It may also have occurred that Gemini 7 had some other different attitude as well, but we don't show that on the screen now. They would then thrust in that direction to leave their circular orbit and travel an elliptical path that intersected the path of Gemini 7 some 130 degrees away. Now, if we select that path and cause the vehicles to move, you see that they start to travel toward the rendezvous point. Gemini 6, of course, is reoriented continuously through this entire maneuver to keep Gemini 7 in line of sight. They do make some minor adjustments, I believe, during this interval of time to make sure they're going to intersect at the right conditions. But when they reach that intersection point of the two orbits, you will see a thrusting appearing which takes Gemini 6 out of its elliptical path and puts it in a circular orbit, the same orbit that Gemini 7 is traveling. There you see that occurring now. From this point on, it would just be a matter of adjusting the orbit from time to time to close the distance between the two vehicles.
Ed, can you take that back just a moment, just to that point where they begin to close, and we'll talk about what the pilot Schirra is doing with some of your IBM onboard equipment, the radar rendezvous equipment, as they move ahead there on this path. And I do suggest that that 7 should be facing 6, Ed.
I think it should.
However, that's a beautiful graphic representation you've got there. I congratulate you on programming that into your IBM machine. But at any rate, as it comes around there, at that point, they're still 17 miles below, and they're about 38, 39 miles in their slant range from each other. At this point, we see that Schirra sees in his radar the range that he's away and what he's got to put into his machine to finally close that last 30 or 40 miles, which is pretty tough to do. Then, as they get actually close in there, it's eyeball. He flies it just like an airplane and comes on in. The next important maneuver, the beginning of the terminal maneuvers, closing beginning now in about 12 minutes from now. CBS News color coverage of Gemini 6 and Gemini 7 will continue in a moment. Let's go immediately to an announcement from Paul Haney in Mission Control.
A new reading approximately every 100 seconds. Tom's last reading showed that the two were about 50 nautical miles apart, which is coming right up on the desired value to begin their terminal phase initiation maneuver at an elapsed time of 5 hours, 18 minutes, 39 seconds. There may be a tolerance here of a minute or two from the values given earlier. The indication it is possible the terminal phase may begin a little bit more than a minute late. However, all the values are coming up very close to expectation. This is Gemini Control, Houston.
You heard the announcement from Paul Haney. They're 57.5 miles apart. That's just about where they're supposed to be, almost precisely where they're supposed to be at this moment, with the terminal maneuver scheduled to begin about 10 minutes from now. At the time the terminal maneuver begins, according to the flight plan,
The Gemini 6 will be 17 miles below Gemini 7, and that has been confirmed. They are indeed 17 miles below, and they should be 32 miles behind. That's a 36.8 slant range. In other words, the actual mileage between the two, 36 and 8/10 miles. At that point, Gemini 6 begins its terminal maneuvers. It turns on its radar and computers in order that these two ships can meet about halfway around the world from the time that that maneuver begins, or around 45 minutes later. Around 30, a little over 30 minutes later, actually. It's a maneuver at that time of 33.7 feet per second, posigrade along the line of sight as judged by the radar to Gemini 7. We'll be standing by to hear that they have established visual contact. As you can see from our Colesman map there, they are right now at the edge of that circle, which shows they're in touch with the Ascension Island station. They'll be out of touch for a short while there, and then be in touch with Pretoria, South Africa, where we have a tracking station now for the first time for this mission, and then that communication overlaps to Tananarive in the Malagasy Republic on that island, which was once called Madagascar, lying off the southeastern coast of Africa. So we should be getting pretty good word directly from the two spacecraft that they have sighted each other. This radar is now the critical feature of the flight, I suppose you'd say, wouldn't you, Mike?
It is indeed, Walter. This is the 7, and this is the 6, and as you said, the 7 is about 50 miles ahead of and about 17 miles above the 6. And Wally Schirra in the 6 is saying, "Where are you?" And the transponder in the 7 is saying back to him, "Here I am," and they're closing, one on the other. But the extraordinary thing about Rendezvous radar, this beam that goes from one to the other is then fed automatically into this IBM computer. Actually, it's fed into two instruments aboard the Gemini 6. One of them, this IBM computer. Now, let's say that Wally Schirra wants to know just exactly where he is right now. He addresses his computer with 6, 9. And all he has to do to find out exactly where he is, in mileage that is to press this readout button. And it shows him at 48.21 miles away from the Gemini 7. He clears his board now, and he wants to know how many feet per second, how much thrust he is going to need to complete or to come very close on this terminal maneuver. So he addresses his computer once again, this time 7, 0. His readout button, and he finds that he's going to need 65.2 feet per second. That's how much thrust he's going to need to get through with this maneuver. What is his orbital angle from Gemini 6 to Gemini 7? He clears his board, addresses 8, 3 in his computer. He reads it out, and this he would find to be a little bit wrong, or I addressed it wrong. Let me clear the board once again. He addresses 8, 3, reads it out, and the computer has momentarily gone down. What it's supposed to show is 130 degrees orbital angle. Will clear it. There's another instrument, though, that's equally interesting. When he, let's say, has gotten to maybe 10,000 feet away, Walter, he then will turn off his computer, chances are. He's now at 10,000 feet away. Let's take a look at this one. This is known as the range rate indicator, and this one shows how far away in thousands of feet, 10,000 feet. This one shows how many feet per second. What is the velocity? What is the rate at which the Gemini 6 and Gemini 7 are approaching each other? 10,000 feet, and they're approaching each other at about 75 feet per second. What's important is here that as he comes closer, now let's say he's only 5 feet away, he wants to keep this needle very close to this needle because he doesn't want to collide, he doesn't want to go past. As he comes down to only 100 feet away, he doesn't want very much in the way of feet per second, so let's say that he has 7 or 8 feet per second here on this rate range indicator. This means that he's going to be approaching very delicately, and as he comes down to this eyeball-to-eyeball situation, he's barely going to be moving. This adds up the relative velocity of the two spacecraft. Walter, you know that Stan Friedman, who is the father of Rendezvous radar, the operation that is so crucial this afternoon, has been here with us at our CBS News Space Center now 3 or 4 times, and on each occasion, Stan, I wonder if you'd come in. On each occasion, for one reason or another, either the Agena blew up or the GT6 didn't get off the pad, but finally this man is going to have an opportunity to see if Rendezvous radar works, and it certainly has been working remarkably up to now.
But Mike, I would say that having him around has been certainly worth it in many ways, and particularly see that big smile on his face when they got the word that the transponder had locked on, the radar had been contact had been established.
Stan, how long had you been working with this Rendezvous radar in order to develop it to this fine, fine point?
Well, Westinghouse started about 3 years ago in 1962 with a group of 5 or 6 fellows that started to develop the system. And of course that grew, and before it was all over, we had hundreds of people working on it, and if I'm happy for them.
How expensive an operation has this been from development right through to today?
Well, the entire program is somewhere in excess of $17 million, and if this sounds like a lot, I hasten to add that it's for all of the sets that were used, some 16 radars and transponders, plus a lot of the cost is in the engineering that went to develop and in the testing. It was tested for simulated environments.
Of course, this Rendezvous radar will be vital in the Apollo program in getting the LEM back up to the mothership in order to get our astronauts back on Earth.
Yes, Rendezvous will be very important because, as you said, the astronauts on the surface of the moon will have to rendezvous with a vehicle going around the moon in order to make it back to Earth safely.
And Rendezvous radar is going to let them find their way.
We sure hope so.
Congratulations to you. It certainly seems to be working perfectly up to now.
Thank you, Mike.
Walter?
Yes, we haven't mentioned for quite a while today the importance of this space first that we are about to report. We assume we're going to be reporting the fact that Gemini 6 and Gemini 7 have rendezvoused, have come within 1,000 feet at least of each other, probably a great deal closer. The first time that has ever happened, that 2 space vehicles have been brought that close together and under the perfect control that will require, and all the computations that Stan's radar over there and the IBM computers can feed to the operation. But the importance of this rendezvous is not to be overlooked. Our entire space program for the future, the manned space program, it depends, the whole moon exploration, upon Rendezvous being proved out as a feasible means to operate in space. We believe also that the Russians depend upon Rendezvous, and they are behind us on that. They have not yet attempted Rendezvous in space except by 2 ballistic spacecraft. And actually these are capsules. Apparently they cannot be maneuvered in space, but they have put them rather close, within 3 miles of each other, simply by orbiting them at that precise point in space. However, they could not, as I say, maneuver toward each other. If we can prove this out for ourselves and the Russians, both space programs can move ahead because we believe that the Soviet moon program involves the building of a huge space station of some sort out in space, which requires rendezvous, and then the launch from that, perhaps building a big rocket itself that would itself then go on to the moon. At any rate, rendezvous apparently is part of their consideration as well. At rendezvous, final phase maneuver the terminal maneuver should begin in another minute or 2 from now. We expect to be hearing from it just as soon as Manned Space Center in Houston gets word. Meanwhile, out at St. Louis, in that remarkably lifelike and life-size Gemini spacecraft we have out there, Bill Stout and Bob Sharp, McDonnell Aircraft, can show us just about what's going to be happening in this rendezvous. Bill?
Well, Walter, I think Bob can pick it up with the radar once they've locked on, as they did quite a while ago. Bob, what do you see if you're Wally Schirra to show that you're locked on to the radar Mr. Friedman is so pleased about?
Well, as soon as the radar is turned on and locked on, you'll see a green light on the front panel, which indicates that you're locked on. And over just to the left of that, on the attitude ball, when he selects radar on his flight director needles and he's pointed toward the target, then these 2 needles that we see here will be crossed, indicating, and this indicates then the direction which the target is from the spacecraft. Just a little bit below that, we have a range and range rate indicator, which Mike Wallace gave us a pretty good demonstration on a while ago, which will tell how far you are from the target and what rate that you're closing on it.
Kind of a speedometer in reverse.
That's essentially what it is, just a speedometer.
The really exciting part, though, has to be when they're within sight of each other, when visually they make contact, which should be at any moment, I suppose, if indeed it hasn't already happened.
Yes, of course, this is a variable distance depending on how good a guy's eyes are, how well he's dark adapted, and so on. But they'll use this optical sight, place it in the window, and then through it we'll see essentially a picture like a gun sight. You'll see the flashing light on spacecraft 7 in this. Now,
right now, are they on the dark side of the Earth?
Yes, they plan to conduct the whole rendezvous on the dark side of the Earth and just come out on the daylight side at the final phase, or just about at docking.
So this is the kind of thing they'll have to fly by?
Yes, all up until they get fairly close, 500, maybe 1,000 feet, and then they'll turn those flashing lights off because they're just simply too bright for a real close approach. And turn on the docking light, which is on top of each spacecraft. And this is about as bright, or a third as bright as an automobile headlight, which will give a good illumination to the spacecraft then as they approach a close range at night.
And of course, Walter, this takes us back, and your talk about the next step in our space program brings it to mind. This takes us back to one of the strong points the people here at McDonnell, the astronauts, the men in Houston and the Cape have talked about with such enthusiasm in reference to Gemini. It is built to be flown by the men inside, as Wally Schirra is about to demonstrate up there.
Yes, but we have the IBM computer and the radar, all this stuff providing information that they can use in this process.
And that's what they're doing right now, flying it. Walter?
We're listening to Gemini Control in Houston. Let's see if we can pick that up.
Should be down on the order of 30 miles. We have had no conversation via Tananarive at this point. And as Chris Kraft observed earlier, the ground has done all it can at this point through computations. It's all up to them now. We're standing by. We'll come back to you when we have additional information. This is Gemini Control, Houston.
That report from Paul Haney was that they had garbled transmission from the Rose Not Victor. That's the tracking station out in the South Atlantic. Garbled transmission, but they believe they understood Tom Stafford to say that he had visual contact with the Gemini 7, that he could see the flashing lights, the powerful acquisition lights on the top of the Gemini 7. That's what they thought they understood from a garbled transmission to the Rose Not Victor line there in the South Atlantic. They're on their way now toward contact with the Tananarive station, and they may learn more later. However, they did get confirmation that the terminal maneuver had begun as planned about now 4 minutes ago. That means that Schirra is now on a line of sight basis as computed by his radar, beginning to give the spacecraft the boost it needs to begin to close up that 17 miles that they're now below, and some 39 miles, 38 miles they are behind Gemini 7. And this maneuver, which takes about 30 minutes, they will slowly close and come up under and in front of the Gemini 7. They presumably have communication with each other. They would normally do that through the ground. When they're out of touch of ground stations, they can get in touch one with the other by going to their so-called UHF channels. This can be or cannot be done as they choose at the moment. All seems to be going exceedingly well. Everything has been precisely on the schedule planned. The only unplanned maneuver of the day was one that actually was in their contingency thinking all along. They didn't quite get to the altitude they wanted in their first altitude change on the first orbit with Gemini 6. On the second time around, they gave it just a little, they called it themselves a tweak. less than a second of burst of the rockets just to bring up the level a little tiny bit. That's all that's been necessary. Everything else has been precisely on schedule. And now these two spacecraft on their 165th revolution, entering its, half hour away from entering its 12th day of Gemini 7, and the fourth revolution of Gemini 6. The altitude they wanted in their first altitude change on the first orbit with Gemini 6. On the second time around, they gave it just a little, they called it themselves a tweak. Less than a second of burst of the rockets just to bring up the level a little tiny bit. That's all that's been necessary. Everything else has been precisely on schedule. And now these two spacecraft on their 165th revolution, entering its, half hour away from entering its 12th day of Gemini 7, and the fourth revolution of Gemini 6. The rendezvous mission, the rendezvous phase of the rendezvous mission is on. It began 5 minutes ago. And we will be staying right here with it, waiting for reports from Houston Manned Space Center and from the astronauts themselves as relayed through the tracking stations and through Houston. They have not specified as to when they expect to get another transmission, but looking at our Kohlsman orbital map, we see that they are even now in contact with the Tananarive station, or should be, if radio communication is as good as it has been all day. And very shortly they will be passing out of touch with that station, out over the Indian Ocean on the way to the next contact at Carnarvon, Australia, on the western coast of Australia. So even now, down in Houston, we assume that the Space Center is talking but through a relay with Tananarive to the Gemini 7 and 6 spacecraft. And if that garbled transmission from Rosnaught Victor is confirmed, they're probably hearing that the spacecraft astronauts Borman and Lovell in 7 and Schirra and Stafford in 6 are talking to one another. We may, and seeing each other, which is even more important. We may get a report on that very shortly from Houston. We're hoping that we do and waiting for Paul Haney to confirm it for us. We're just minutes away now from really the most critical part of the rendezvous flight. I shouldn't say we're minutes away, we're in the middle of it. This is the Rio test. Can they now close in as they had anticipated? Every other part of the orbital changes in and out of plane have taken place as planned. There's no reason to expect that this shall not. And then it becomes an eyeball situation, as they say. It'll be a matter of Schirra flying in there just as he expects to. Here's Paul Haney at Mission Control, Houston. We'll stand by. We got word that he was coming up. We have a signal system, you know, from Paul Haney, who sits there in the last row of the 4 rows of flight controllers, right behind Chris Kraft, the flight director. And
this is Gemini Control, Houston, at 5 hours, 25 minutes into the flight. Gemini 7 and Gemini 6 are now about 25 miles apart. They're over Tananarive. We're listening to them via the Tananarive station. And most of the conversation is between Borman and Schirra. Borman apparently cannot see the acquisition lights on 6. Here's how the conversation is going.
Tananarive, go remote. Tananarive, remote. Tananarive has acquisition. Back. And we're passing about 40 degrees, Mike. Ready? Okay, 20 seconds to go with 2 minutes. I'll never make it. I can't hear it. Move on before us, right? 3 minutes. You say you're pissed out at 30 degrees? About 32. Alright. It'll start freezing pretty fast. Had a good burn. We can't see our aircraft.
This is Gemini Control at Houston. The time hack that you heard Tom Stafford make there was a reference to the start of his terminal phase initiation burn. The hack he gave was 3 minutes from the burn, and this will be his time reference as they close on 7. As they move some 4.5 miles a second, swinging across the Indian Ocean. The pass is going to take them right up between the Carnarvon and the coastal central Quebec acquisition areas. We are hopeful that the coastal sentry will see and hear the rendezvous as they come very close together up right about the Philippines area. This is the waiting time, of course, and it's all up to them. We'll come back to you as soon as we have new information. This is Gemini Control at 5 hours, 29 minutes into the flight.
It's all up to them. Some pretty important words of Paul Haney's from Mission Control. And what he means is that the pilots, the spacecraft, are out of touch with ground stations now. They're following their flight plan as the skilled test pilots that they are, and will make their rendezvous without help from the ground. Paul also suggesting that we hope that the coastal sentry Quebec gets a good communication signal with them. They're going to be right on the edge of his communication area so that we can get confirmation as to how the rendezvous mission has gone. But now Mission Control and we must simply wait while Wally Schirra and Tom Stafford in Gemini 6 and Frank Borman and Jim Lovell in Gemini 7 go through this first rendezvous in space. Incidentally, you heard Tananarive say that they had LOS, which means loss of signal. AOS, acquisition of signal, LOS, loss of signal, as these spacecraft pass over these particular tracking stations. During the final phase of this rendezvous mission, Gemini 6 must be eased up from its own circular orbit. They're 17 miles below Gemini 7 into the one being flown, of course, by Gemini 7. Flight Director Chris Kraft described this for Nelson Benton.
Now, the final maneuver is made when spacecraft 6, this distance from here to here is 34 nautical miles approximately, and this distance is approximately 15. So that at this point, the spacecraft 6 will apply a maneuver as computed by its onboard computer, and it will start a maneuver which carries it around such that 130 degrees of arc, let me get that a little more correct for you, at about 130 degrees, this being 90 degrees and then 40 more degrees, 130 degrees around is where the two would come up and meet and have the same orbit if he then applies the right velocity at this point to bring him into the same orbit as spacecraft 7. And this maneuver will have started 1 minute into darkness if we've gotten him in the right place by the maneuvers we've told him to conduct from the ground. So 1 minute into darkness, and we want the darkness at this time so that spacecraft 6 can see the lights of spacecraft 7 against a star background. He'll always be looking up at him as he comes up. And then this particular point occurs actually where the two will literally join together, and there'll be some variation here, but that point will be 2 minutes into light. So that now that he's gotten very close to the vehicle, now he can take advantage of the sunshine, and they can see each other very clearly once they're very close together.
CBS News color coverage of Gemini 6 and Gemini. At this moment, the historic moment in space as Gemini 6 closes on Gemini 7, its terminal maneuvers having begun just 17 minutes ago, and even now, if there are any mid-course corrections needed in this last 35 miles to separates them, Schirra is making the first one right now. He'll make another one in another 10 minutes or so, and then at 2:26, let's see, that's 14 minutes from now, they should be within 1,000 feet of each other, the point at which we are considering rendezvous having been achieved. Already, however, they are in visual contact. Just a few moments ago, Tom Stafford said, "It looks like we've got them at 12 o'clock high." Those are the important words confirming that they were in visual contact with each other. They could see each other floating there through space. And now as they close at a rate of better than 100 miles an hour at this moment, and it will slow considerably, of course, a little later on, they are obviously beginning to see each other much more clearly. The closest that any other space travelers have come to this feat was back in 1962, when two Soviet spacecraft, really capsules on a ballistic missile that is unmaneuverable, carrying Andrei Nikolaev and Pavel Popovich, came within about 4 miles of each other. They did see each other, but that's as close as they came, and it was for a matter of seconds. CBS News color coverage of Gemini 6 and 7 will continue in a moment after a pause for station identification.
This is CBS. Project Gemini, Rendezvous in Space. From the CBS News Space Center in New York, here again is Walter Cronkite.
As Mission Control in Houston has told us, this is the waiting period. The spacecraft are out of communication with ground stations as they hurtle over the Indian Ocean, and as Gemini 6 is closing slowly with Gemini 7. They have established a visual contact. They see each other. They established some time ago radar contact, so their onboard computers are telling them just how far apart they are and how much they must fire their thrusters and in what direction so they can achieve this rendezvous. And they are talking with each other, we assume. It is not, may not be actually in communication at this moment because their primary means of communication is by relay through the ground stations, but they can turn on UHF transmitters and talk one with the other if they decide that this is necessary. They are now just about 11 minutes from the point when they should be within 1,000 feet of each other, and here's an announcement from Paul Haney in Houston.
This is Gemini controlled Houston. We've had no contact with either spacecraft since our last announcement. According to all our plots here, at this time, the two should be 8 to 9 miles apart. We are very hopeful that the coastal center of Quebec will be able to get a piece of this, or at least the end of it, as they come together. But we just don't know yet. The line out there is very good today, and their acquisition has been good. Good range on it. This is Gemini controlled Houston.
At this point, at about 15,000 feet or some 3 miles apart, Schirra was scheduled to slow down his Gemini 6 by around a 25 foot per second burn, or 17 miles per hour. That would be the speed he would reach. About 17 miles per hour in their relative speed. Of course, they're both going 17,550 miles an hour through space, but their relative speed is now 17 miles per hour as Schirra begins to close in on Gemini 7 Frank Borman up there in the command pilot seat of that spacecraft on his just about to start his 12th day. That will begin at 2:30, just as they are in Rendezvous. And then in just 4 minutes from now, they should be within 3,000 feet of each other, less than a mile. That just over half-mile space, at that time Schirra will fire his rockets again to slow down to about 7 miles per hour speed in closing. And then as he comes into 100 feet, well, he slows down even more, down to about 1/3 of a mile per hour. From there on out, it's just he moves in as close as he thinks he wants to go. Beyond that, feels that the situation out. He has no instructions to touch Gemini 7 and probably would not want to endanger the mission with such an operation, although, as we've heard Bob Sharp say, he considers that to be no danger to that. But at any rate, it's not written in the mission plan that they should touch. After that, by the way, Schirra will back off from Gemini 7 to at least 100 feet again. Then he will conduct what is called an in-plane fly-around. That is, as they both go through the air at 17,500 miles an hour, without going out of orbit, he will trying to maintain a position of 60 feet from the Gemini 7, 10 feet more or less. Within 60 feet, he'll fly around Gemini 7, coming back to this position. Then Lovell will take the controls, or Stafford rather will take the controls, and he will move Gemini 6 in and out, experiment with it, and then he will conduct an out-of-plane maneuver, coming around the Gemini 7 in that fashion, out of plane, which takes a great deal more fuel than an in-plane maneuver, since you're fighting the centrifugal force of these two objects hurtling the Earth at 17,500 miles an hour. The rendezvous maneuvers, once rendezvous is established, do not include any extensive maneuvers by Gemini 7. It carried about half the amount of fuel for such maneuvers when it went aloft. When it was originally built, it was not planned that Gemini 7 was going to participate in any such rendezvous operations, and there was no room aboard for additional fuel without endangering that mission. So it does not have enough aboard to participate very extensively in these maneuvers. It's, as they have referred to frequently, Borman and Lovell, the friendly target vehicle for Gemini 6. They really, for the most part, just sit there. They will yaw and pitch to keep the Gemini 6 in sight all the time, and they will move in and out once or twice, but no extensive maneuvers. And now Paul Haney down in Houston again.
This is Gemini controlled Houston. The coastal center Quebec now is reading the telemetry signal from both spacecraft. They estimate the distance at about 25,000 feet, on the order of 5 miles. And that agrees very closely with our plots here. We're hopeful that we'll get some voice communication as the two come very close together.
The telemetry information Haney talks about is the automatic information, the readout of the various instruments aboard the spacecraft, their radar and so forth, that are repeated on the ground automatically. The telemetry comes down on a wide band of a lot of information.
Wally Schirra has just advised that he's braking a little bit. That's the only part of the conversation we can understand. We're standing by.
If that was a simultaneous transmission at 221, he was scheduled to brake. 221, however, at that time, according to the original flight plan, he should have been a little closer in than 25,000 feet. There may be a time lag in that information. Also, as these maneuvers have been carried out, there would be some change.
Quebec says the conversation is way down. It's murky. We're having trouble copying it here.
In other words, they're having trouble in Houston understanding it. The point is that the spacecraft are really on the edge of the coastal century Quebec. The ship, the tracking ship
Coastal Century
area
reads the range at 20,000 feet.
Apparently we're getting a real time, that is a simultaneous readout. There's 25,000 a moment ago, now it's 20,000. They've closed more than a mile in the last minute. And we will continue to get these reports, apparently from Haney, until the spacecraft have passed out of the signal range of the coastal century Quebec. With the look at our Koosman map, we can see what happens thereafter. You see that circle is the coastal century Quebec's signal area.
Coastal Century reads 18,200 feet. Elliott C advises that they have completed their final mid-course in this sweep up to the altitude of 7.
Adding a 7-minute differential on here for corrections made during flight, the flight plan, that they should be 15,000 feet, correcting my own figures, 15,000 feet apart, or about 3 miles over the Indian Ocean at 222. Excuse me, over that area of the Western Pacific, over the coastal century Quebec, at 222 now. That it's now 223.30. With a slight time lag for communications, it may very well be that they're right on target on that basis.
Charles Lewis, the Manned Spacecraft Center communicator out in the coastal century, advises the range is now 15,000 feet.
There it is, 15,000. Just a little under 3 miles.
We can hear Schirra coming up in the line every once in a while, but the conversation might best be described as unreadable. It's just a surge on the line, and just from experience you can identify Wally's voice there, but nothing really intelligible coming over it. I don't think the coastal century Quebec is reading it any better.
Saying before, that circle represents the range of the coastal century Quebec under nominal conditions, that is the expected conditions. The communications over the Pacific have not been good today, and apparently coastal century Quebec, as you have heard Paul Haney say, is not hearing that too well. Right as it passes over the right-hand side of that
Flight
circle.
director here is asking for computer summaries from the coastal century every 30 seconds.
They will be out of touch again very shortly until picked up by the next tracking station along the line, which is Hawaii.
Tom Stafford comes through. He said the range is 1.7 miles.
And this is about what it looks like from that Gemini 6 spacecraft as they close on Gemini 7, shooting over test engineer Bob Sharp's shoulder, who's sitting there in the command pilot's seat of our Gemini 6 mock-up at St. Louis. 1.7 miles This approximately is the view that they're getting. Keeping the line open to hear more from the voice of Gemini Control in Houston, relaying information from Coastal Century, Quebec. Bob Sharp, what are you doing right now if you are Wally Schirra?
Stafford comes through again with 1.3 miles.
Beg your pardon, Bob?
I said right now he'd be getting to do his final braking maneuver. 1.7 mile, he's indicating that's roughly 10,000 feet on the his radar range and range rate indicator. And,
he's now down to 1.2, Bob, we just heard.
Okay, and he'll be getting prepared here then to do a final braking maneuver and drop from somewhere around 40 foot per second down to about 4 foot per second then.
Right. That would bring him down to about 2.5 miles an hour, in other words.
Houston here, they should be breaking into the sunlight. Chuck Lewitt on the Coastal Century just advises we do have LOS, loss of signal there. We may get additional information from the range tracker parked west of Hawaii. Last reading we had from Tom was 1.3 miles. The ranges given to us by the Coastal Century were slightly larger than those given by Stafford.
What are you doing there now, Bob?
We're flying here, essentially maintaining approximately the same attitude that Schirra should have at this time during the mission. So he'll be pitching up slowly here. Actually, he's in a heads-down inverted position now with his nose slightly up. Soon they'll be rolling to a heads-up
The two
position.
spacecraft should be breaking into sunlight just about this time. Perhaps a minute or two ago.
Bob, he's eyeballing this now. He's flying this as a pilot, and he's simply looking out the window. And don't, wouldn't you have put that reticle up there in the window by now? I suppose we have it out so we can see through the window and see the other spacecraft.
Yes, we had it out up here earlier to show the initial part of the simulation, and we've pulled it out now. At this range, they are still using the reticle, and but after they get a little bit closer, they won't need it anymore. So he'd have that reticle up,
right,
and the window in this position here.
Okay. We can almost read through that with our television cameras. Fantastic view from here. Just
Yes,
about see it.
Yeah, it's designed to not interfere with your view any more than it has to.
That camera of ours is as if it were sitting right between you and Bill Stout there, looking over your shoulders. We can see over your left shoulder out your left hatch window. You were pointing out to me when I was out in St. Louis there a few days ago that their visibility actually out of those windows is pretty good, despite the windows look so small.
Yes, as you move your head close to it, you can see 70 degrees or so out to the side, and you can see straight up or 90 degrees over your head fairly easily.
Well, they're looking out that window as they approach Hawaii now. The spacecraft obviously seeing each other well. They should be, although we haven't had confirmation of this, well within 1 mile of each other. As a matter of fact, according to the flight plan, they should just at this moment be about a half mile from each other, closing at the rate of about 2.5 miles an hour until they get down to that 100-foot distance.
You know, this is a spot where they're closing real slow, and it probably seemed like eternity when you're in there doing it.
We're still remaining comparatively silent here as we wait for more word from Houston.
Closing that slowly, Walter, it's going to take them, what, another 9, 10, 11 minutes to come up within, say, 100 feet of each other?
Oh, let's see. It'd probably be something like that.
I have the book in front of me, fellas. I'm cheating a little bit, and the book says about 7 minutes to close from 3,000 to 100 feet. They're, of course, as everybody has said, and I think Bob and Bill, you have pointed out many times, at this point, the book really doesn't count that much. As Schirra has said, too, he's flying this spacecraft now, and from here on out, all of this formation flying they do will be pretty much pilot discretion, unless they are ordered otherwise from the ground, although they do have a specific second-by-second flight schedule, and presumably as test pilots, they'll stick pretty close to that, but it is their discretion, I believe. Isn't that right, Bob?
Yes, and the times given in the book are
This is Gemini Control.
nominal.
We have an announcement.
53:54 minutes make it into the flight of Gemini 6. And we expect acquisition at Hawaii at 36 minutes after the hour. It's entirely possible that we'll have communication with the range tracker, which is also out on station at roughly the 180-degree parallel. Prior to that, several minutes earlier. By all our estimates here, 4 minutes make it into the flight of Gemini 6. And we expect acquisition at Hawaii at 36 minutes after the hour. It's entirely possible that we'll have communication with the range tracker, which is also out on station at roughly the 180-degree parallel. Prior to that, several minutes earlier. By all our estimates here, the two should have gotten within, say, 100 feet of each other at 5 hours and 50 minutes into the mission. That's what Elliott C. called it. And we'll just have to sweat out these next 2 minutes to find out how everything went, because as we said earlier, the communication as we passed out there in the southern periphery of the CSQ was altogether murky. The 1 or 2 readable messages we got through there came from Tom Stafford calling out the range in nautical miles. We heard him say 1.7, 1.3, and that's the last communication we had via CSQ. We are now attempting to get voice communication through the range tracker, and we'll stand by and come back to you when we have new information.
This is really quite phenomenal. If one wanted to pun about it, you'd almost say that they brought this space flying to a science, because that flight plan, that great big thick book, which is the size of a telephone book and details second by second how these flights should go, called for their being within 100 feet of each other at 5 hours and 50 minutes into the flight. And if Elliott C., the astronaut who is the spacecraft communicator there at Mission Control is correct, they made their rendezvous at 100 feet at just that precise second. However, that confirmation will have to come when we get this first word from Hawaii. Seeing the exterior of the spacecraft now, and this is about the sort of view that Wally Schirra and Tom Stafford would be having as they close with and eventually fly around Gemini 7. Once they get within 100 feet, and that should come over the western Pacific there, over not too far from Indonesia, they continue a slow approach to, Schirra has said, well within 20 feet. And then they back off 100 feet a few minutes later, then start conducting their maneuvers, flying around each other. Actually, 6 flying around 7.
This is Gemini Control, Houston. Now we have raised the 6 spacecraft over the range tracker. Tom Stafford advises in the calmest voice I think we've ever heard that they are 120 feet apart and sitting. 120 feet apart and sitting. Let's try to get some additional conversation from them. Right now there's a lot of rough air on the line, but perhaps they will come back.
copy. Ohms remaining 50%.
Radar check, Gemini 6 away.
Standing by, Hawaii.
This is Gemini Control, Houston. They've taken down the range tracker line now. And when Tom Stafford came through with that reading that of 120 feet and sitting, here in the control center, everyone broke out an American flag and pinned it up on his console. There must be fully 40 flags in this room right now. Everyone is standing. Every room looking on this mission control operations room is jammed with people. The floor itself has the usual number. Let's go back to Hawaii, which has raised 6.
We copy.
Okay. Guys, really a shot. You hit the droop on those wires in there. Stop draping it on me. Where are they hanging from? Oh, Frank, it looks like it comes out at the separation plate. It might be the fiberglass. It's approximately 10 to 15 feet long.
The separation plane from the booster, right?
Affirmative.
That's exactly where you have one, too. It really belted around there when you were firing your thrusters.
Looks like about 8 or 9 feet long and double wire.
Right.
We'll come and take a picture of that.
So up there they talk.
Away.
We copy.
Do you want to go ahead with this flight plan update, future room, or do you want to just hold on?
I asked them if they're ready to copy.
Okay. 7 away. Go ahead. I got a short flight plan update if you'd like to copy it.
Stand by one.
So as they hurtle along up there over Hawaii, they look at each other's spacecraft and tell each other how the 7 looks to 6 and how 6 looks to 7.
Okay. D4, D7. 265.
This is a readout of technical information regarding a future flight plan, which usually involves only minute changes in the matter of a few seconds at times at which various maneuvers take place.
I take in sequence 427. Mode 03.
Important thing now is that America has achieved this tremendous first in space. Second perhaps only to the first manned flight in space, Yuri Gagarin, a Russian first. This is the next greatest achievement in space, and this is the more sophisticated one perhaps that puts us well on the road toward true space exploration.
Mode 01.
They're 125 feet apart. Schirra has perfectly braked his Gemini 6 down to the point where they're keeping that exact distance and hurtling along at the moment until Schirra decides to either move in a little closer or move out for that in-plane maneuver as he circles Gemini 7. And these two spacecraft up there are seeing things that man has never seen before, specifically another spacecraft in flight, just 125 feet away. And they're telling each other some rather interesting technical information.
I've got an update for you if you're not too busy to copy the short one. I'll let Tom talk here.
This is the Hawaiian station, and through Hawaii, the control there at Houston, talking to the spacecraft, giving them technical information. They've told each other that there is a trailing line of some kind, some part of the debris apparently left after separation of the second stage from the adapter section, which is that big white section behind the spacecraft itself. Both of them seem to be trailing this piece of material. I don't think it's ever been suggested before that such a piece of material does hang on to the spacecraft, and obviously it goes just as soon as the adapter section is dropped for retrofire. It's nothing that has any effect apparently on the flight itself.
06 plus 35 plus 00 pass at Hawaii rev 4. D8 08 plus 10 plus 00 pass at Hawaii rev 5. Okay, very good. You've got it.
Very shortly, in about, it should be about 10 minutes from now,
We sent you some extra OBCs.
we should be getting some excellent information from the spacecraft as they come back into the range of the continental
7 Hawaii will be standing by.
North American tracking stations.
Roger. Just seems to be a lot of traffic up here, that's all. All the policemen. It's pretty exciting during the terminal run. As we looked out, we could see the two Gemini stars casting pods off to the right of Gemini 6. The correction is 7. They're all in the line. Roger.
Should we have spacecraft 7 turn off their adapter C-band?
Roger. 7 Hawaii, will you turn your adapter C-band off? Roger. It's in the command position.
That's good.
Okay. That will do it. Flight away.
Where does that come from? That's not right.
Go ahead, Hawaii.
Okay, we're not having any trouble with radar interference. We're tracking 6, so he's in a good position on his beacon.
Roger.
He's in the catch-up mode.
Roger.
He seems to be holding real steady. We're getting very little OMS activity. And we have copied and completed the tape dump.
Picking up bits of conversation between the astronauts 125 feet apart, facing each other, Gemini 6 in front of Gemini 7, as they come across the Pacific Ocean, rendezvous having been achieved, a first in space, American flags broken out at Mission Control in Houston. Here's Paul Haney at Mission Control.
You heard the Sharon Moorman discussing this incredible encounter in space over Hawaii there, joshing each other about the condition of their spacecraft. The flight plan calls for them to be performing an in-plane fly-around by Shira at this time. He's to fly completely around the spacecraft, and they're to maintain a distance of approximately 100 feet. They're talking to each other again. Let's go back.
Some experiment. Nowadays, both the office.
Ask them what their range is now.
6, what's your range? 20 feet. Or rather, 20 feet, right?
They're 20 feet apart. That's what Shira said he was going to do, bring it in within 20 feet.
And we have LOS all systems. Both vehicles have away. We did it.
...185 miles above the Earth, traveling 17,550 miles an hour, and they're 20 feet apart, looking at each other through those
Lost
cockpit
signal now
windows.
via Hawaii. The last message from there, I think, came from Ed Fendel. Just a brief statement, we did it. You heard Tom Stafford estimate the range at 20 feet. just before we lost signal. As I said, the 6 is to perform a fly-around maneuver. Then spacecraft 7 is to take some thruster plume photographs of 6. They're to continue their station keeping at 100 feet. And within a very few minutes, we should acquire from California. Go ahead, TV Boo.
We haven't had any specific information from Houston as to how well they feel Schirra is doing in the use of his maneuvering fuel aboard Gemini 6. He did report he had about 50% of it left.
Flight Director Chris Kraft here is asking Elliott C. to ask the two to enlarge a bit on their description of the encounter. We're also getting some Delta V information. Here's Elliott C. telling the two that several million people are interested in how it went. Here it is.
We initiated with a Delta V that was 031 forward. It started initially as 007 up and decreased to 004 up at initiation and right 001. At the completion of TPI, we had 62% fuel remaining.
Roger.
Up off of the mid-courses. We have about 49 now left.
Roger, 49% now.
That's the story. Our first mid-course was 007 forward, 005 left, and 007 up. The final mid-course was 004 forward, 06 right, and 003 up. This pretty much confirmed with the plot. We're a little bit below the nominal line there, of the plot at that time. And the braking, we knocked out 27 feet per second down to V with our braking. There's 27 feet per second aft, a total of about 14 left.
Roger, 27 feet per second aft and about 13 left.
Roger, 14 left is a final one.
Roger.
When we were in position at 120 feet to the stop, we had indicating 50% fuel.
Roger, copy.
It's Tom Stafford talking about their maneuvers to get up there.
Fairly nominal, and the one backup solution that I did get for the mid-course would be very close with the closed loop.
Roger, Tom.
Right now we are SES 7 as DEF under, I'd say what, 10 feet apart? 5 to 10. Yeah.
That 50% fuel is just about as NASA planned it.
6.
About 10 feet.
Roger.
Gemini 7.
Go ahead.
After this fuel cell is dropping down again, you want to split the platform offline?
Stand by.
Guaymas remote, California local.
I'm remote. Platform mode anymore. I haven't done anything yet, Lon. I'm just flying the reticle on the right. Oh, okay.
Gemini 7 Houston, we'd like to leave the platform on and take stack 2C off the line at this time.
Stand by. Okay, here we go.
That's Gemini 7, which has been having trouble with one of the stacks in its fuel cells.
Roger. What was your current on it before you took it off?
5.5 amps. Superior is 10 to 5.5.
There are 6 stacks available. 1 is enough for flight. One of the 6 stacks has been running erratically, and they've now turned it off, as you just heard. Should not affect the mission or the safety of Gemini 7 in any way. These test pilots are pretty cool cookies while they're there just 20 feet apart.
Gemini 7 and 6, would you continue with the description of your station keeping?
7 managed to get that information out on the fuel cell.
Right now, 6 is about 10 feet above and to the left of 7. We're just flying nose to nose, approximately 15 feet apart.
Roger.
We can very clearly see the horizon scanners operating.
Roger, Tim. Gemini 7, are you able to see in the windows of 6 very easily and vice versa?
Roger, 7 here.
Pilots may be a little busy up there, but they're certainly not, well, there's no Graham McNamee in space today. Not giving us play-by-play exactly, which is understandable. Schirra undoubtedly is pretty busy, and Lovell as well. Schirra and Stafford in 6, Lovell and Borman in 7. Historic meeting. And obviously they don't want to spend a lot of time talking about it yet. They'll have a lot to say later on. They're barely a couple of man lengths apart there.
Wally, I figured lateral approaches is firing out about 40 feet for what we can visual that we can see. How did it? We can't tell now, we're in too close, but if we were doing a braking maneuver, we could see quite a bit out. I'll come back over so I can move the nose a little bit.
It's a simulation, just about what Schirra has seen out of his command pilot's window in 6.
One is guillotine off at the booster, and another at the spacecraft plane. Yeah, you got the same thing all the way back here. The wire bundles, of course.
These transmissions are a little bit hard to read, but the historic nature of this flight is well worth hanging in there for the words we can gather.
76, did I understand your report that thruster plumes were seen 40 feet out?
I was Gemini 7, and I'm sure they saw them that far. They could see them. Looks like we're going to hose them down with them. That's we just put on this braking maneuver, and lateral thrusters fire quite a ways out.
Roger, 7.
Apparently, the scientists back there at Mission Control didn't think the thruster plumes could be seen that far, 40 feet from
Texas
the
remote,
spacecraft.
Guaymas local. Texas remote, Guaymas low.
The business of Guaymas local Texas remote is the passing of control of the primary communications from one tracking center to the other. Texas, Corpus Christi, is now relaying the communication to mission control.
Gemini 7, Houston. We plan to put 2C back on the line at the RKV.
Okay.
It's approximately 20 minutes off the line.
RKV is Rose Not Victor. It's the tracking station out in the Atlantic. 2C is the stack C, third stack in the second section of the fuel cell, which has been turned off. It's been a little erratic.
Gemini 7, Houston, could you give us a readout on your stack currents?
Stand by.
Houston's now in direct control of the spacecraft.
10.5 amps, 1B, 11 amps, 1C, 9.5 amps, 2A, 8.5 amps, 2B, 7.5 amps, 2 Charlie, board zero.
Roger, Jim.
Space.
Open circuit voltage on 2 Charlie's reading 31.2.
Roger, copy 31.2.
The two spacecraft.
Very good, 7. You might keep an eye on that 2 Charlie voltage and see if you can see it jump up like it did yesterday.
Roger.
Two spacecraft.
Gemini 7, would you switch your adapter C-band to continuous? Gemini 6, would you switch your adapter C-band to command?
Gemini 6 adapter to command. What you see, Wally? You guys sure have big beards. You're white, you're in style. Right.
Gemini 6, Houston. On that update at Hawaii, those remarks of pass at Hawaii Rev 4 and Rev 5 actually do not apply to you. Those were instructions to Hawaii.
Spacecraft are now over the Central American Isthmus. They'll cross down over northern South America on this pass. They're in communication directly with Houston now. We'll be passing out of the signal area of Houston in just a moment or two, perhaps already have. We haven't had any confirmation yet that Gemini 6 has begun its in-plane fly-around, that is, circling of Gemini 7. The amount of fuel it has on board after all of the maneuvers to achieve this fabulous, historic first in space, this rendezvous, that it has just about the amount of fuel expected.
We're now out of touch with those two spacecraft as they swing down the west coast of Central America, beginning a pass across South America. The Rosnaut Victor should raise them next. You heard the last transmission that they were running somewhere between 6 and 10 feet apart, and apparently in good style, good comfort. One can certainly almost sense the feeling of achievement evident in this room and in the back rooms which have supported this mission. You have to go back to the Alan Shepard flight, at least in my memory, to recall a time when all of the flight controllers were standing at their consoles at the moment of when this rendezvous occurred and when we got that first report. There's a lot of handshaking going on in the room now. Dr. Gilruth has come in, is congratulating Chris Kraft. Dr. Shea, the head of the Apollo program, has come in the room. At 6 hours and 21 minutes into the flight, this is Gemini Control at Houston.
So this historic rendezvous has been achieved. Dr. Robert Gilruth, the head of the Manned Space Center, as you heard from Paul Heaney, is down there congratulating the men who put this flight together and have shepherded this flight along since, as a matter of fact, the first Mercury program, our first men in space. And we can assume that Chris Kraft, the flight director, the young flight director who is the head man down there in flight control, has lighted up that long green cigar. They asked earlier from Australia when he anticipated doing that, and he told them and the men in the spacecraft that he was going to light up the long green at 6 hours into the flight, meaning after rendezvous. We can assume that that stogie is puffing away even at this moment in mission control. Perhaps someday they're going to let our live television cameras in mission control at Houston, and we can see the excitement there in the space flights. So far, the NASA people have ruled against that for fear that any cameras in the room covering live, at any rate, might upset these
men behind their consoles, and they don't want to do that, of course. That's their judgment. Certainly doesn't happen to be ours. But right now, the spacecraft 6 to 10 feet apart, and the next time we hear from them, it may be that they have begun their in-plane maneuver, the fly-around of Gemini 7 by Gemini 6. Up to now in the Gemini program, astronauts have proved that a spacecraft can be maneuvered from one orbit to another, and that men can spend at least 8 days in a weightless condition. And during a recent interview, Wally Schirra talked about what he and Tom Stafford hoped to prove during their part of this dual flight.
We, of course, have succeeded in proving man is capable of the duration required for a lunar mission with Gordon Cooper and Pete Conrad. Now it is up to Tom Stafford and me to prove that we can rendezvous with another object in space. This, on the lunar mission, would be the lunar excursion module that 2 astronauts would land on the moon with, lifting off the moon and rendezvousing with the command module that put them in lunar orbit in the first place. With these 2 steps completed, we are well on the way to what we feel is our national goal of accomplishing a lunar landing and return to Earth where we would like to land.
We've had no confirmation yet either that Wally Schirra and Jim Lovell and Tom Stafford, Air Force, Lovell and Schirra stayed in the Navy. They're all now astronauts. Schirra, one of the original Mercury 7 astronauts, the other 3 in that second class of astronauts that came in shortly thereafter. And now all 3 of them space veterans, particularly Borman and Lovell. These 2 35-year-old pilots who have set every space endurance record with their flight of Gemini 7 and seem to be standing up very well indeed. They said the other day that, in fact, just yesterday, that they were getting indicated they were getting a little bit tired up there. They said they were getting crummy and itchy after not having been able to shave or bathe for some 11 days. And incidentally, they're now a half hour, 33 minutes precisely into their 12th day of flight. They'll be coming back to Earth on Saturday morning. Now the rendezvous has been achieved so successfully, it is expected that Gemini 6 will come back tomorrow morning at 10:26 a.m. for itchy, after not having been able to shave or bathe for some 11 days. And incidentally, they're now a half hour, 33 minutes precisely into their 12th day of flight. They'll be coming back to Earth on Saturday morning. Now the rendezvous has been achieved so successfully, it is expected that Gemini 6 will come back tomorrow morning at 10:26 a.m. for splashdown time. CBS News color coverage of Gemini 6 and Gemini 7. This is Walter Cronkite back at our CBS News Space Center in New York, where we just reported the successful rendezvous of Gemini 6 and 7. Wally Schirra and Tom Stafford bringing Gemini 6 up within 6 feet of Gemini 7, flying around there, looking right into the cockpit windows of Gemini 7. And Gemini 7, those bearded astronauts who took off a week ago Saturday from Cape Kennedy, staring right back at them, and presumably with a great big smile. Schirra's got up there, or I think it was Lovell that took aboard a large Annapolis Brigade of Midshipmen flag, and he may be waving it in his window right now, as far as we know, at Frank Borman, the only West Point graduate of the 4 Service Academy men up there. We said a minute ago that we don't get live television coverage of these exciting moments at Mission Control for reasons best considered by the Manned Space Center and NASA's program, but they do let us tape these top moments at Mission Control in Houston. They have done that again, and we are going to be permitted in a few seconds from now to show you the video picture of Mission Control during rendezvous. I'm assuming that we will not have any audio again. Perhaps we will. My assistant, Sanford Sokolow, is nodding frantically here that we will get some audio. We haven't had that before. Let's see now if we can pick up those pictures from Houston taped a little while ago. This This is the display board at Mission Control in Houston. They're probably holding on this picture for a moment until they've got the other one queued up for us and ready to show. This is the way the mission controllers there in Houston follow the flights on this huge display board, very similar to the one we have here at CBS. Schirra and Stafford came close enough, we're now told, from Houston to see the 1 week growth of whiskers, or at least that's what they said. He said, you guys sure have big beards. The crew of Gemini 6 was supposed to have said by radio, and they added, you're right in style. I don't know whether that was a reference to the Santa Claus season or the beatnik era, but at any rate, they are in style for one or the other. Assumably, neither has turned gray in space, so maybe they had more reference to beatniks than to Santa Claus. There's nothing in the Gemini 7 mission to have turned either Borman or Lovell gray, unless it might have been concern over their fellow astronauts on the ground on last Sunday when their Titan II booster ignited for 1.5 seconds and then turned off. Only the astronauts and the technicians at Houston and the Cape know how dangerous that situation could be, and it's quite certain that Borman and Lovell had a serious few minutes of concern until they learned that the pressure was dropping in the tanks and that was all was well with that Titan II on pad 19 and with Schirra and Stafford upstairs. CBS News color coverage of Gemini 6 and Gemini 7 will continue in a moment after a pause for station identification.
This is CBS.
And this is Walter Cronkite back at our CBS News Space Center, where we've been reporting the rendezvous of Gemini 6 and 7. They're out of touch with ground control stations right now as they are over the wilds of Brazil, the Amazon itself. They are flying within 6 or 7 feet of each other, or at least they were at our last contact some 10 minutes ago. They will be now, we assume, performing maneuvers scheduled for them, with Gemini 6 flying around Gemini 7, an in-plane maneuver, that is, without going out of orbit, and then a little later an out-of-plane maneuver. And that will just about complete their 4 hours of rendezvous. About 7 o'clock this evening, 4.5 hours after they started, it is scheduled for them to then begin to slowly pull apart, and for Gemini 6 to prepare to return to Earth tomorrow morning. Around 10:26 is the scheduled splashdown time. A moment ago, before our last commercial break, we promised you some pictures of Mission Control, and we're still waiting for those. It is the tape report of their the moment of rendezvous as those flight directors down there jumped up from their seats and congratulated each other, according to the verbal report we had from Paul Haney a little while ago. NASA is holding up that videotape for unexplained reasons after telling us it was coming up. We expect to hear from them very shortly. We've now got a really big mark of success on the escutcheon of American space travel, one that this whole nation, and I'm sure the free world, was rooting us on toward. If there is any question about supremacy of one of the space competing nations over the other, it would certainly seem that the United States took the long leap forward and is ahead as of today. This is something that the Soviets have not done. They have not come anywhere near a rendezvous of this nature. The nearest they have come is about 3 miles for a few split seconds of 2 spacecraft on a ballistic missile course that is uncontrolled spacecraft. Here, 2 spacecraft were flown even as aircraft is flown. The environment of space that had once been called hostile seems no longer to be. The 4 spacemen up there today, and that's more than any nation has ever had up at one time, in these 2 spacecraft are functioning as pilots, flying spacecraft even as they go, and bringing them within a few feet of each other. We're now told that we do have those pictures of Gemini control at the Houston Manned Space Center, and we can show them to you now.
This is Gemini 6. The ball remaining is approximately 50%.
Roger, copy. Ohms remaining 50%.
Radar check, Gemini 6 away.
Standing by, Hawaii.
By one, we're showing you go here on the ground. What are you reading on 2 Charlie at this time? Put it on 5 amps. Say again, please. A little over 5 amps. Roger. Gemini 6 Hawaii, Capcom. Go ahead. Okay, we're showing you here on the ground. Can you give me a status? Yeah, we're in formation with 7. Everything is go here. Roger, congratulations. Excellent. Thank you, a lot of fun. Flight away.
We copy.
Okay. You guys really a shot. You went to droop on those wires hanging out. Stop draping it on me. Where are they hanging from? Frank, it looks like it comes out at the separation plate. It might be the fiberglass. It's approximately 10 to 15 feet long. The separation plate for the booster, right? Affirmative. That's exactly where you have one, too. It really belted around there when you were firing your thrusters. Looks like about 8 or 9 feet long and double wire. Right. We'll come in and take a picture of it. No plate away.
We copy.
Do you want to go ahead with this flight plan update to each of them, or do you want to just hold off?
I ask them if they're ready to copy.
Okay. 7 away. Go ahead.
Well, that wasn't quite the scene that Mission Control had promised to us. They'd promised a moment of rendezvous when those flags you saw on their little stands on the consoles of the flight directors were broken out. That film was a little bit later. That the moment that you saw some of these people wandering around in there, well, most of the time they're sitting right at those consoles, and at the moment that rendezvous was achieved and confirmed that they were 100 feet in and going in closer, like other great moments for all of us at football games or any other great event, the men behind these consoles stood up and a cheer went up and they broke out these American flags that they'd all been storing away. It was an unprecedented event in Mission Control. Last time any of us remember anything like that happening was on our very first manned space flight when Alan Shepard made his suborbital 15-minute flight down the Atlantic missile range. Wally Schirra, we're now advised when told that, or when congratulated by the ground control station, says that sure was a big deal, talking about the first moments of rendezvous. We have had no confirmation, as we say, that they've started their maneuvers up there, the in-plane and out-of-plane fly-arounds, but it is assumed by all concerned that they have. Today's success, as I was suggesting a moment ago, gives the United States a major first in the space race, because this business of rendezvous is such a major and important part of getting to the moon and back. The Soviets brought to space two spacecraft together, as I said, in 1962, again another few miles apart in 1963, but this was not in any sense a real rendezvous. Charles von Fremd asked Dr. Charles Sheldon of the President's Space Council how this U.S. effort compares with past Russian successes.
It's a very real advance over the 1962 and 63 Soviet experiments. They were the first to bring ships fairly close together, but they never completed the kinds of maneuvers that we will hopefully see with this flight to bring ships actually in very close position to each other.
What you're saying, then, is that the Soviets on those two occasions lacked the capability of changing orbital flight plans.
That's right. On the 62 case, they made a direct ascent to bring the ships within about 3.5 miles of each other, and that was all they could do, and the ships then drifted apart. In 1963, they came within 3 miles, but they were on a crossing kind of orbit where there was no chance whatsoever of maneuvering close up.
Well, if the Soviets had this very close capability, and after all, 3 miles within two 17,000-mile-an-hour vehicles in space is pretty close, why do you think they have not achieved the capability which we hope for in Gemini 7 and 6?
I think this is a real question, a mystery that hasn't been satisfactorily answered. With the kind of demonstration that they did so long ago, we certainly thought that before this time we would have seen it. It certainly suggests that the present vehicle combination that the Russians have been using does not have within it the capability to do this needed maneuvering or the docking of actually bringing two ships together to lock them into one combination.
I'm not trying to put you on the spot because we never know what tomorrow morning's papers or broadcasts are going to say. Excuse me, but is it your feeling now, sir, that the Soviets do not have this close rendezvous and docking technique which we are pursuing in the Gemini program?
Well, all I can say to that is that they haven't demonstrated it, that we know. When we will see it is something that only the future will answer. I certainly think it's going to come along very shortly because it's such a logical extension of space technology, and it also is one which they have been promising us for some little time.
Well, maybe without sounding super patriotic or chauvinistic, maybe this is the day for that even. I think we can safely say that in all aspects of space exploration, manned space and unmanned space flight, the United States is now, as of this moment at any rate, in the lead. We have done more in the 3 major space races now than have the Soviets. We have, in the race in pure scientific research, put up far more scientific satellites than have they. In the matter of practical applications in space, we have done far more with our communications and weather and other satellites, including the unfortunately nicknamed Spy in the Sky, SAMOS, which takes pictures of the ground around the world. And now in manned space flight, although still behind in the size of the capsules, the spacecraft we can put up, we're putting more sophisticated spacecraft up than they are, true spacecraft that can maneuver. We proved it today. They can maneuver and meet up in space. The biggest step forward since the first man went out there. And I think that, well, I was about to say that I think that all of us in the space who have been covering space are particularly glad that one Wally Schirra could have a part in this historic day. He's a favorite of all of ours, and in a moment I'm going to ask Chuck Van Fremd, who's down in Houston and an old-timer in this space coverage, to talk about it, Wally, with me. But right now, Paul Haney at Houston.
Ground readouts. We are estimating here that Schirra and Stafford used 175 pounds of fuel to complete that rendezvous. That's a figure from the terminal phase initiation point on into the actual rendezvous point. We show spacecraft 6 with 365 pounds of fuel remaining. I'll emphasize that that is a very conservative usage of fuel to achieve what those two achieved in at last 130 degrees from the southern tip of Africa to a point out over the western Pacific. We were prepared to expend at least twice that much in order to conduct that rendezvous attempt. Here now is some tape conversation of the two talking to each other, occasionally talking to the Rosnaught Victor off the south coast, off the coast of South America.
Houston Flight RKV, voice check.
Go ahead.
Roger.
What'd you say?
I was just having a voice check.
Roger, read you loud and clear. How me?
Loud and clear. telemetry solid on both spacecraft.
Roger, RKV.
Gemini 7 RKV. Go ahead, RKV, Gemini 7. Roger, we'd like you to bring stack 2C back on the line. Come on. Back on. Roger.
Did you get an open circuit voltage before they turn it on, please?
Looks like it's about the same frequency as they took it off of. Roger, what was your open circuit voltage before you turned it back on? 31.5 volts. Say again?
31.5.
5 volts. Roger. What are you reading now? That's 2C current. 2C current reading 6 amps and closed circuit voltage is 25. Roger. We're reading 5.5 on 2C on the ground. Say again, Gemini 7.
I said we have company tonight.
You sure do. We'd like to know how you can see the act lights on 6.
He doesn't have act lights.
Did they see the dock light?
Did you want? Right, yeah. We picked you up on it with a 70 cycle off your doctor.
CBS News color coverage of Gemini 6 and Gemini 7 will continue in a moment. One sad note here today in this space program, the aircraft, the private plane in which Dr. W. Randolph Lovelace, the head of the Space Medicine Program, had been flying with his wife and a private pilot from Aspen, Colorado to Albuquerque, was found smashed into a mountainside near Aspen, no sign of life. However, elsewhere in the space program, a day of triumph for America as Gemini 7 and Gemini 6 achieved the first manned spacecraft rendezvous. CBS News live color coverage of recovery of Gemini 6 begins at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Our CBS News Space Alerts as developments warrant our next regular Gemini report at 5 p.m. Walter Cronkite, CBS News Space Center.
Project Gemini, Rendezvous in Space.